Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a time where being a queen meant wearing 10 pounds of brocade while silently enduring political chess matches where you were often the piece, not the player. Welcome to medieval royalty, where your crown is heavy, your smile is rehearsed, and yes, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I love knowing who's on the other side of this journey. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're 13, maybe 14, and someone just told you you're getting married. You're a noble girl, maybe a princess, maybe the daughter of a minor king, and you're about to become a medieval queen. Romantic, right? Nope, this isn't love, it's politics through and through. Your future husband is chosen for what he can offer your father. Land, troops, a treaty, or maybe it's just an end to a blood feud that's been going on longer than you've been alive. Your opinion isn't just not required, it's not even considered. If you protest too much, you risk dishonouring your family. And you know how that ends. Spoiler, not well. You're packed off from your home with a procession of ox-drawn carts, dowry chests, and worried ladies in waiting who've been assigned to babysit you until the grave, or worse, until your new court decides to swap them out for spies. Maybe you've met the king once, maybe not, doesn't matter. You'll meet him again on your wedding day, under a canopy of incense and chanting monks, in front of a crowd of strangers who can't wait to see if you cry. And you probably will, because this man isn't some dashing fairy tale prince. He's 35, grizzled from wars, maybe still married to someone else who's been conveniently locked in a convent. Or worse, he's a boy your age, with just as little power and a court full of venomous old nobles using you both like dolls in a shadow play. Historically, this wasn't rare. Eleanor of Aquitaine was married to Louis VII of France at 15. She became Queen of France basically overnight. Her job? Be beautiful, obedient, and give France an heir, in that exact order. Not that she obeyed any of it, by the way, but we'll get to her legendary rebellion later. Right now, your life is all about silks, sapphires, and suffocating responsibility. And the wedding, let's not sugarcoat it. You walk down the nave in a gown that weighs more than your horse and embroidered with gold thread and lined in squirrel fur. Sounds luxurious until you realise medieval laundry was, inconsistent. You may look radiant, but you smell like beeswax, old lavender, and stress sweat. Everyone's watching. Everyone. The bishop, your future in-laws, the servants pressed against the back walls trying to catch a glimpse of the spectacle. After the vows and rings, maybe a crown if they're feeling generous, you're escorted to a room where, depending on how invasive the customs are, your first night with your husband might be witnessed. No, not metaphorically. There's an entire tradition in some courts of having noble witnesses observe the newlyweds being put to bed, and even a sheet check the next morning to prove the marriage was consummated. Sleep well. The weirdest part, your family likely trained you for this moment. You were raised in a chamber near the women's quarters, taught to read just enough to recite psalms, trained in needlework and decorum, but no one told you how terrifying it would be to kneel beside a man who can literally sentence people to death and call him your beloved lord. You might not speak his language, you probably don't know what kind of ruler he is, and you're expected to share his bed, smile like it's an honour, and get to work on making babies immediately. The power imbalance is staggering, but here's the twist. Queens weren't always powerless. In fact, many wielded incredible soft power through influence, alliances, and religious networks. But in the beginning, as a teenager dropped into a foreign court with different food, strange customs, and possibly even hostile nobility, you're more decorative than decisive, and yet there's something surreal about it too. You're handed a crown draped in cloaks worth more than a farm, and referred to as Her Grace by people who, a week ago, didn't know you existed. Your name changes. Your coat of arms is redrawn. Your past, absorbed into your husband's world. This isn't just a marriage, it's a rebranding. You're not a daughter anymore. You're property, carefully placed atop the chessboard of European dynasties. Sometimes you're lucky. Maybe your husband is kind. Maybe the court respects you. Maybe you learn to speak the language, make allies, and even carve out a space of your own. But don't get too comfortable. Your womb is now a matter of state. Your first duty is to have a male heir, preferably yesterday. Everything else is just window dressing. One fringe fact, in some royal weddings, the bride was literally carried to bed in a ritual known as the bedding ceremony, complete with songs, jokes, and awkward nudging from older relatives. The entire court treated it like the grand finale of a banquet. Imagine that as a teenager. Scholars still debate whether queens were pawns or players in this system. Some insist they were nothing more than vessels for heirs and peace treaties. Others argue that despite restrictions, they often held real sway, especially if they managed to outlive their husbands or raise powerful sons. But tonight, you're just a young queen, sitting on the edge of an unfamiliar bed, staring at tapestries you don't recognise, trying not to cry. And guess what? It only gets more complicated from here. The next morning, sunlight pours through stained glass windows you don't recognise, casting jewel-toned shadows across a stone floor that's colder than your nerves. You're awake far too early, muscles aching from the stiff ceremonial bedding, and already the court is bustling with whispered gossip and clipped footsteps. Why? Because today, your dowry becomes official. And let's be honest, no one in this castle cares more about you than they do about what you're worth. The dowry isn't just a polite thank you for taking you off your father's hands. It's a carefully calculated package of wealth, land, titles, and sometimes entire cities. You are a geopolitical transaction in pearls and velvet. It's possible your dowry was discussed for years before you even hit puberty. And now, with the marriage complete in the most awkward sense, the accounts are due. Clerks in itchy robes hunch over parchment, squabbling over exactly how many cows or manors equate to your hand in marriage. Some royal dowries were absolutely bonkers. Margaret of Denmark, for instance, brought the entire Orkney and Shetland Islands as part of hers. Imagine being so valuable that whole chunks of the North Sea came with your wedding vows. Meanwhile, in France or England, the dowry could include jewellery, spices, bolts of cloth, and thousands of gold coins. An actual line item might be 12 gowns embroidered with peacock feathers. And this stuff wasn't symbolic, it mattered. If the dowry fell short or was delayed, it could spark a war. Yep, a war over your missing embroidery thread. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Your value is now locked into this transaction. If your dowry was large and paid on time, congratulations. You're a prized political asset. If your father shortchanged your husband or reneged on promises, you're officially the most expensive disappointment in court. No pressure, but it gets trickier. The dowry isn't just a one-way street. There's also something called a dower, which is what your husband promises you in return. Sort of a, just in case he dies horribly in battle, fund. It usually includes lands or income-producing properties that you'll inherit if you outlive him. Of course, whether you'll actually get those lands, well, that depends on your husband's mood, your popularity, and how many scheming in-laws want those assets for themselves. There's a fringe historical tidbit here that's kind of hilarious. In a grim way, some dowries were detailed down to the number of undergarments included. Like, your father might have sent a full accounting of your trousseau, including how many linen shifts you brought and whether they were laced with gold thread. Some of these inventories have survived, and yes, they are weirdly specific. It's like reading a medieval fashion hall on parchment. The moment this transactional dance is complete, you officially belong to your husband's household. Your loyalties shift instantly, whether your heart has or not. And here's where it gets wildly awkward. Sometimes your father and husband hate each other, like deeply, but that doesn't matter anymore. You have to play nice, stay neutral, and most importantly, produce heirs. That's the only part of the deal that can't be written on parchment. So everyone's watching, waiting to see if you start showing signs of pregnancy. Fast. Oh, and don't expect privacy. Courtiers love to speculate. There's even a term for the flurry of surveillance queens faced after their weddings. The queen's bloom. Everyone wants to know when you'll bloom into motherhood. If you sneeze at breakfast or skip a wine goblet, whispers swirl like storm clouds. Some queens even faked early pregnancies to buy themselves time. Others miscarried in secret just to avoid court humiliation. You might try to focus on something less overwhelming, like settling into your new chambers. But even that's fraught. Your rooms are richly decorated. Yes, gilded wall panels, carved bedposts, rugs imported from Byzantium. But you're not alone in them, ever. Your ladies-in-waiting sleep nearby, servants shuffle in and out without knocking, and everything you say can and will be repeated. Still, you try to take control of what you can. Maybe you ask for your favourite psalter to be placed by your bedside. Maybe you commission a tapestry depicting your family crest to remind everyone, including yourself, where you came from. Little acts of self-assertion can go a long way, but you learn quickly. Don't overdo it. Being too proud is risky, especially if you're a foreign queen. People want you to be dignified, not defiant. Here's a scholarly debate that never quite gets settled. Were dowries empowering or dehumanising? Some historians argue that because the dowry often came with land rights and income, it gave queens leverage within the royal household. Others counter that the whole system reduced women to literal price tags. You might find truth in both views. After all, you've got land and jewels, but also about as much autonomy as a decorative tablecloth. And then, of course, there's the awkward reality that you might be used again. If this marriage fails, say your husband dies suddenly or the alliance falls apart, you can be shipped off and married again, sometimes to someone even older or with fewer teeth. Your dowry might be renegotiated like a used goods exchange. The only thing more unstable than a political marriage is a second political marriage. Yay! But for now, you smile, sit upright at feasts, and pretend the sausages and honeyed almonds make it all feel normal. You clasp your goblet with elegant fingers and laugh politely at jokes you barely understand. Every gesture is watched, every misstep judged, every moment documented, sometimes literally, in court records or chroniclers' scrolls, because you're no longer a person, you're a symbol, a treaty, a gilded link between two unstable kingdoms, and as exhausting as all that is, it's just the beginning. The first time you see the castle that's now your home, you expect something majestic, maybe soaring towers, lush gardens, polished stone glowing in the afternoon light. What you get instead is something out of a chilly dream. Cold walls, grey skies, the air thick with damp moss and suspicion. The castle isn't built for comfort. It's built to withstand sieges, and now you live here. Congratulations. The arrival at court is theatre, make no mistake. The entire court turns out to greet you, though no one smiles too widely. Banners fly, trumpets blare, and children are scrubbed within an inch of their lives just to stand in a muddy courtyard waving sprigs of rosemary. You ride in, stiff in the saddle, posture perfect. Your gown probably weighs 30 pounds, and underneath you're bracing against saddle sores and cold wind that cuts through your silk-lined sleeves like a knife. But you can't flinch. Queens don't flinch. At the castle gates, your husband, or future husband, depending on how drawn out the wedding festivities are, greets you with ceremonial gestures. A kiss on the cheek, a quick touch of the hand. If he's bold, maybe he lifts your veil in front of the crowd, but you're already scanning the faces behind him. That's your real concern. Who's watching you with narrowed eyes? Who's smiling a little too much? Because the moment you cross that threshold, you're not just a guest, you're an intruder in someone else's world. The court is a hive of activity. Men in embroidered tunics bow stiffly. Women in heavy wimples exchange glances, and servants skitter like mice behind the scenes. You're introduced with all the usual pomp. Her Royal Grace, Queen of such and such, Lady of this and that. It takes a full 2 minutes just to say your title, but every word reminds everyone exactly what price you fetched. That title is sewn into your identity now, whether you like it or not. Inside, the place smells like burning tallow, wet stone, and whatever the kitchen is stewing for tonight's feast, which could be anything from spiced rabbit to eel pie. The walls are lined with tapestries that look warm, but don't really help against the draught. Your rooms, what they call the Queen's apartments, are secluded enough to keep you from the general rabble, but not so private that gossip can't sneak in through the floorboards. And here's the kicker. You don't know anyone. Not really. Maybe your new mother-in-law if she's still alive and hasn't been packed off to a nunnery. Maybe your ladies-in-waiting if your father managed to send a few you trust. But most of the people around you, strangers. Ambitious, gossipy, power-sniffing strangers. And you're a teenage queen with no allies, no experience, and no idea which fork to use for salted trout. A real-life example of this cold welcome? Anne of Bohemia. When she arrived in England to marry King Richard II, people openly mocked her dowry, calling it worthless. She didn't even speak English. She was thrust into a world where her new subjects expected miracles and instant charm, and she delivered neither, at least not at first. It took years for her to win people over, and you will try too. You'll smile politely at barons who ogle you, ask careful questions about local saints, compliment tapestries even when they're ugly. Everything is performance. And the worst part? The performance never ends. You're not allowed to sulk or snap or ask to go home, not unless you want to start a diplomatic incident. Oh, and you quickly realise that every step you take is being watched. Not metaphorically, literally. There are eyes in the walls, not magic, just very bored, very nosy servants who report to higher-ranking courtiers, who in turn feed information to the king's advisors and eventually to the king himself. Did the queen eat her figs at breakfast? Did she talk too long with the Spanish envoy? Did she wear blue on a feast day? All noted, all discussed in hushed tones over spiced wine. But let's zoom in on the servants for a moment, because this is where things get weird. Some are devoted, some resentful, and some are just there. One might be a peasant girl who's never left her village before being promoted to chambermaid. Another could be the bastard daughter of a noble family with nowhere else to go. And a few, full-on spies. Some sent by your own family, some by your enemies, and some just nosy opportunists with good ears and long memories. The fringe fact here, in some medieval courts, queens were expected to keep their own miniature household within the larger royal household. Think of it like a secret club with its own budget, hierarchy and drama. You manage your own maids, scribes, cooks and confessor. Sounds empowering, until you realise any one of them might betray you the moment it benefits someone higher up the chain. Meanwhile, your new subjects are watching too, and they have opinions. If you're from a foreign land, you're immediately suspected of trying to corrupt the court with foreign ideas, or worse, foreign fashions. They whisper that you bring omens, that your accent means your prayers don't count, that your foreign ways are a sign of secret sin. Even if you're kind and generous, rumours cling to you like damp wool. This brings us to a long-standing scholarly debate. Were foreign queens more vulnerable or more powerful because of their outsider status? Some say they had fewer political allies and were easy scapegoats. Others argue that their unique background gave them a rare independence from local factions. In your case, it just feels like being isolated in a room full of people who all know something you don't. But still, you settle in. You memorise names. You learn which corners of the castle stay warmest at night. You start eating like the locals, sort of. You practice curtsies in front of the looking glass until your knees ache. And slowly, very slowly, the court begins to see you not just as the new queen, but as their queen. Not that this makes things easier. In fact, it just means the real games are about to begin. Night falls heavy in the stone corridors of your new home, and while the day has been full of handshakes, veiled compliments, and trying not to trip over your own embroidery, tonight is something else entirely. Tonight is about duty, or depending on which court gossip you listen to, spectacle. You're expected to do more than share a bed. You're expected to seal the marriage in a way that leaves no doubt, no legal loopholes, and no, we'll wait and see. Tonight, you're expected to consummate your union. And in some medieval courts, that expectation doesn't stop at the bedroom door. You've heard the whispers, of course. Some kingdoms go all in on the witnessed bedding ceremony. A crowd escorts you and your husband to the marriage bed with jokes, songs, and awkward blessings. Think of it as a medieval conga line, except it ends with you being undressed by your ladies while everyone else stands around pretending not to stare. In some places, the bedding itself was attended, though mercifully, not always literally witnessed. Instead, the next morning, sheets were displayed, or midwives and matrons might be called to check for certain, signs of activity. You lie in bed, heart pounding, draped in linens that smell like damp rosewater and centuries of awkward history. Your husband lies beside you, possibly more nervous than you are, though he'd rather be thrown to the wolves than admit it. Whether he's gentle or cold or fumbling or practiced, you're still a teenager, and no amount of training or advice can prepare you for the reality of being expected to perform intimacy with someone who was a stranger last week. This is not a honeymoon, it's a civic ritual. And while it's cloaked in lace and candles, it's ultimately about succession and legitimacy, not your feelings. This is what queens were trained for, even if no one said it out loud. You may have spent years learning courtly manners, religious verses, how to direct a household, but all of it leads to this, making sure the marriage is binding and productive. It's a terrifyingly thin line between beloved queen and political failure. You wake up the next morning under that same weight. You're a wife now, a potential mother, a state investment that needs to yield results. And people start watching you differently. The same courtiers who nodded politely yesterday now glance at your stomach when you pass, eyes flicking down as if your womb might announce its intentions by breakfast. Your maids whisper more, the ladies-in-waiting act more possessive, and your husband, well, he's probably off hawking or hunting, because the deed is done, and his role, at least for now, is considered fulfilled. You might not even be the only woman in his life. Medieval kings were not known for monogamy. Some had official mistresses, others just a rotating list of favourites, many of whom lived under the same roof. In some courts, the queen was expected to tolerate it. Open jealousy, not elegant. You're meant to be serene, divine, and above it all, even if your heart's breaking or your blood's boiling. And yet some queens navigated this chaos with surprising agency. Take Isabella of France, for instance, married to England's Edward II, who famously preferred the company of a certain male favourite. Isabella endured years of being sidelined before eventually leading a rebellion against her husband. Yep, the queen led an actual coup. So while the first night might feel like the beginning of a lifetime of submission, that's not always how the story ends. But in this moment, that feels very far away. The court isn't done with you yet. After the marriage comes the public confirmation of your new role. You might be paraded through the streets in a gilded carriage, petals thrown at your feet, people cheering as if you've already delivered twins and saved the kingdom from plague. It's all part of the illusion. Queens aren't just figureheads, they're symbols of divine blessing. Your beauty, your poise, your fertility, all seen as signs that God favours the realm. No pressure. A fringe fact worth noting. In some traditions, a special cake or spice bread was served the day after the wedding, and everyone would toast to your hypothetical future children. Sometimes there were even fertility symbols baked into the crust. Because what's more charming than cutting into a cake and finding a little golden baby charm staring up at you? But don't be fooled. Under all this pomp lies a harsh truth. If you don't get pregnant quickly, or worse, if you miscarry, your popularity will nosedive. People will blame your body, your foreign blood, your sins, your lack of piety. Never mind that medieval medicine was basically guesswork with leeches. Never mind that men also contribute half of that equation. You are the queen, and therefore the breeding machine. The pressure is constant and deafening. There's a long-standing scholarly debate about how much say medieval queens had over their own marital beds. Some argue that queens could negotiate bedroom dynamics, especially if they were politically savvy, or came from powerful families. Others believe queens were largely powerless, their consent a non-issue in legal and religious eyes. What we do know is that many queens found clever ways to control what they could. Timing, influence over household staff, and eventually guidance over their children's futures. But at this stage, you're mostly along for the ride. So you do what you must. You perfect your smile. You begin keeping a private journal, perhaps, or whispering thoughts into the ears of trusted maids, though trust is always relative. You go to mass, you attend court, you send letters to your mother back home if the scribes allow it. You start planning for what comes next. Not just pregnancy, but survival. And survival, you're starting to realise, means more than staying alive. It means staying useful, charming, obedient, fertile, unthreatening, but also clever, resilient, patient. You're walking a tightrope wrapped in gold thread, and every morning as the bells toll across the grey courtyard and your reflection flickers in a polished copper mirror, you ask yourself quietly, how long can I keep this up? It starts with a flutter, just a whisper of nausea when you rise, a slight tightening in your chest when the morning porridge hits your stomach the wrong way. Your maid notices before you do, narrowing her eyes as she helps lace your gown a little looser. The word spreads faster than you'd think. The queen is changing. Courtiers exchange looks. The cook starts preparing lighter foods. A physician is summoned without you even asking. No one says the word directly, not yet, but you already know what they're hoping for. You're pregnant, maybe. And just like that, you're not just a wife anymore. You're the womb of the realm. You've gone from ornamental to essential. The queen's job, your job, is finally happening. And while on the surface there's joy, gifts, blessings, and ceremonial prayers, underneath it all is the sound of chairs being pulled closer to the throne. Because once you're carrying an heir, your power shifts just a little. But enough for people to start calculating how long they'll have to wait for a new king, or, if you're really lucky, a queen mother. Pregnancy in medieval times is terrifying. There are no ultrasounds, no prenatal vitamins, no real understanding of germs or what a uterus actually looks like. You're not so much cared for as you are monitored, watched like a relic on the verge of cracking. The royal physicians poke and prod, feeling your pulse, measuring your belly with ribbons, muttering things in Latin, while your ladies-in-waiting line up cloths soaked in lavender and rosemary. Some of the herbs help, some probably don't. Some, if the dose is wrong, might even kill you. And yet you go through the motions, trying to appear serene. You attend Mass every morning, nodding piously while the priest talks about the Virgin Mary and the miracle of life. That's the image they want from you. Holy Mother, chosen vessel, serene goddess of impending motherhood. But inside, you're a 17-year-old girl with lower back pain, a constant headache, and zero control over what's happening to your body. Every kick from inside your belly is both thrilling and terrifying. If it's a boy, you win the game. If it's a girl, you smile politely and pretend everyone's not secretly disappointed. And if the child is stillborn or you die in labour, well, then you'll be remembered in ballads as a tragic heroine, which is cold comfort, to be honest. By your 7th month, the palace begins to quiet down. Your husband grows more cautious. Visitors are screened. Loud noises are forbidden near your chambers. The court is holding its collective breath. Midwives are brought in from far and wide, some traditional, some trained by monks, all quietly panicking beneath their calm smiles. Because childbirth in the Middle Ages is a gamble with weighted dice. Even queens die screaming in childbed. Probably especially queens. The pressure is higher, the gossip sharper, the risks enormous. And when the labour finally begins, the world shrinks. You're taken to a darkened room, windows covered, icons of saints propped up all around you. Candles flicker along the walls, shadows dancing like anxious angels. The room becomes what they call a lying-in chamber, sealed against bad spirits. It's hot, crowded, and thick with the smell of burning herbs and fear. You scream. Of course you do. There's no pain relief, just grip and groan and chant and pray. The women around you, your ladies, the midwives, maybe even a few noble women, offer comfort, or at least try to. Some hold your hands. One might whisper a prayer in your ear over and over like a lullaby. But you're alone in this, really. Completely, utterly alone in your pain. Hours pass, maybe days. You lose track. The world becomes a blur of heat and agony and tightening pressure. You scream until your voice breaks. You pass out and come to. You think you hear someone say, "It's crowning," but it could just as easily be the last prayer you'll ever hear. And then, if you're lucky, a cry. A new voice, raw and angry, slicing through the candle smoke. A midwife lifts the child high, announces the sex with trembling reverence. "A boy," she says, or maybe a girl, and the court outside erupts accordingly. You don't even see the baby at first. You're too exhausted, too bloody, too shattered to sit up. But someone presses the infant into your arms eventually, and for a second, a fleeting golden second, you feel joy. Pure, unfiltered joy. It's yours. This tiny squirming person is yours. And then you remember he doesn't really belong to you. He belongs to the kingdom. If it's a son, he's the heir. And your value skyrockets overnight. You're no longer just the queen. You're the mother of the future. A living insurance policy against succession wars. Your rooms fill with gifts. Your name is sung in churches. And suddenly everyone wants your opinion. On nursery arrangements, on treaties, on what colour robe the baby should wear for his first court appearance. If it's a girl, the congratulations are still there, but lighter, softer. A courtier might mention how daughters make wonderful bargaining chips for future marriages. Another might remind you that queens bear many children, and there's always next time. The fringe truth? Sometimes, if the queen gave birth to a boy, coins were minted within hours. Tiny, hastily stamped medallions that said, "This realm has an heir, all is well." If you gave birth to a girl, well, no coins. Maybe a feast, if you were lucky. And here comes the scholarly debate. Did childbirth increase a queen's political power or trap her further? Some argue that motherhood granted queens influence, control over the royal nursery, a seat at the regency table if the king died. Others point out that it made queens more vulnerable, exposed to dangerous childbirths over and over again, reduced to walking cradles whose usefulness hinged on the health of their offspring. The answer, as always, depends on who you were, where you ruled, and how lucky your body was. You're bundled up in clean linens now, propped on pillows, your skin still pale and waxy. But the baby is breathing. You're breathing. The bells are ringing across the city. The kingdom rejoices. And you close your eyes and try to forget that this is only the first round. You've survived childbirth. That alone makes you something of a miracle. Now, as the days blend into a haze of damp linen, soft lullabies and sharp pelvic pain, you begin to settle into your new role, not just as queen, not just as wife, but as something far more exhausting, royal mother. And with that title comes another shift, one that has less to do with survival and more to do with presentation. You can barely sit upright, but already the court expects you to begin looking the part again. And looking the part, as it turns out, is a full-time job. Your wardrobe becomes a stage, and every layer you put on is political. Every colour, every hem, every jewel carries a message. I am regal. I am fertile. I am strong. But more than anything else, it screams, I am worth obeying. You're no longer dressing to impress a husband. You're dressing to remind the kingdom that you belong here, that you have produced proof of your power in the form of a living, breathing heir. You're not to be dismissed, ignored, or replaced. Not yet, anyway. In the royal wardrobe, there's no such thing as casual. There's only layers. Chemise, kirtle, gown, overgown, cloak, silk, velvet, fur, embroidery so fine it looks like lace, stitched with real gold thread. Jewels sewn directly into sleeves. You don't wear your wealth. You drag it behind you, sewn into the hem and clinging to your wrists. Your crown alone could buy a small town and still have change left over for a cathedral bell, and yet, underneath it all, you itch. The brocade is stiff. The pearls rub your collarbone raw. Some of the ermine lining smells like damp cellar, especially in winter when nothing dries properly. You long for soft linen shifts, for bare feet on warm stones, for a moment without corsetry and pins. But queens don't get comfort. They get presents. Now here's the tricky bit. You don't actually choose your wardrobe. Not entirely. A royal tailor does that, so does your chamberlain. And sometimes, just for fun, your mother-in-law weighs in. Your body is essentially on loan to the crown, and so is the fabric that wraps it. If a foreign ambassador visits, they'll expect you to wear a particular colour, perhaps blue to signify purity, or red to evoke power. If it's Easter, your garments will be stitched with lilies and crosses. If it's Advent, out comes the dark velvet and silver thread. Every season is a costume change, historical tidbit. Queen Isabella of Castile's wardrobe accounts are some of the most detailed period we've got. She had a whole inventory of gowns categorised by purpose, diplomatic, devotional, ceremonial and hunting. Yes, hunting. In a floor-length gown with wolves nearby, royal fashion was less about utility and more about peacocking in the middle of a mud pit. And then, of course, there are the accessories. Jewels passed down from ancestors, rings engraved with Latin inscriptions you're expected to quote in polite conversation, belts that double as reliquaries filled with saints' hair or bits of bone, not because you're superstitious, heaven forbid, but because everyone else is, and a properly blessed belt might stop your uterus from falling out. Or so they say. One of your most iconic accessories is the veil. Delicate, sheer, sometimes nearly invisible, but don't be fooled. It's not just for modesty. The veil is a signal that you are set apart. A woman of dignity. A woman who doesn't have to meet your eyes directly to command your obedience. And yet you still see through it. You see everything. Beneath all this pomp, there's a practical reason for the spectacle. You're establishing your own visual authority. The king may rule by sword and seal, but you rule by presence. In a crowded court where half the nobles think they could do your job better, your gown is your armour. You may not hold a sword, but you cut through a room just the same. You begin to learn the rules of fashion diplomacy. If a visiting queen shows up in emerald green trimmed with fox fur, you wear sapphire velvet and double ermine, because you must outshine her without making it obvious. Too much flash and you're vain, too little and you're dull, 1 inch too long on your train and you're mocked for excess. 1 inch too short and you're accused of disrespecting the court's traditions. It's a minefield made of silk. There's a particularly bizarre fringe fact from Burgundy where noble women sometimes wore tall cone-shaped hats called hennins, so long and ridiculous they required scaffolding underneath. These hats became so elaborate that some cathedrals banned them because the ladies couldn't fit through the nave without kneeling. Imagine bowing before the altar and having your hat impale the priest. Of course, men's clothing is also ridiculous, but nobody seems to mind. A nobleman can look like a plucked parrot in velvet hose and a codpiece the size of a cantaloupe and still be taken seriously. But you? Your hem comes up 1 inch too high and the court clutches its pearls. There's a scholarly debate around this, as you might expect. Some historians argue that queens used fashion as a kind of soft rebellion, subtle statements of power wrapped in acceptable aesthetics. Others insist that fashion was just another form of control, a way to keep queens ornamental and docile. Maybe both are true. You certainly feel like you're performing constantly, but you also notice how people listen more closely when you wear the heavy jewelled girdle versus the modest linen sash. The symbols matter, and you learn to use them. Eventually, you begin directing the wardrobe staff more forcefully. You ask for brighter colours, you commission new fabrics, you have your seamstress add secret pockets, yes, real ones, for letters or prayer beads. You choose gold embroidery in the shape of hawks, because your family crest had hawks, and because everyone needs a reminder that you are not to be underestimated. And you begin to understand the power in being seen. The court doesn't always want to hear you, but they always see you. Every feast, every procession, every mass, you are there, and you are luminous. Even when your ribs are bruised from your corset, even when you can barely lift your arms from the weight of your sleeves, you smile, you float, you glide, because in this world, looking like a queen is half the battle. You might not be able to speak your mind yet, but you can shine so brightly no one dares to look away. From the outside, your inner circle looks like a dream team of perfectly dressed, perfectly obedient women, who flutter when you flutter and laugh when you laugh. Your ladies in waiting, they're always called something delicate like attendants or maidens, follow you like shadows. They help you dress, walk you to chapel, fetch your scented gloves, and hold your hand during particularly tense dinners with foreign envoys. But behind those doe-eyed smiles and tightly laced bodices is a nest of quiet schemers, desperate for influence. And you're sitting in the middle, trying to figure out who's loyal and who's just keeping score. Your ladies come from noble families, of course. Being assigned to the queen is an honour, technically. In reality, it's also a power play. Their families send them to keep an ear close to the throne. Some are daughters of earls hoping for strategic marriage offers. Others are nieces of bishops or cousins of foreign queens. One might even be your sister, which makes everything 10 times more awkward. The expectation is that these women will serve you with humility and grace. The reality is that they serve the court first, their families second, and maybe, you a distant third, if you're lucky. Still, you grow attached. How could you not? They see you at your worst, vomiting from morning sickness, weeping over miscarried babies, pacing with fury when your husband returns late from hunting. They know when you're faking a headache to avoid court, when your smile is stitched together with spite. You spend more hours with them than with your king. They're the only people who witness the real version of you, hidden under the crown, but there's a cost, always. A lady who becomes too close might be accused of manipulating you. Another might secretly resent your status and try to outshine you in court. And of course some of them are flat-out spies. Harmless gossip shared in the comfort of your chamber can wind its way into your husband's ear by supper. You learn quickly that even a yawn can be weaponized. One particularly unnerving truth: some of your ladies might be sleeping with your husband. Not officially, of course, no one says it. But in a court filled with wine and long winter nights, the line between attendant and temptation blurs fast. You can't exactly call them out without igniting scandal, and besides, the blame would fall on you. Were you cold? Neglectful? Too busy embroidering altar cloths to keep your husband satisfied? People always find a way to make it your fault. Take Catherine Howard, 5th wife of Henry VIII. Her ladies-in-waiting played a direct role in her downfall, either by enabling her secret meetings, or by testifying against her when things soured. What started as whispers in the women's chambers ended with Catherine kneeling on a scaffold, her name forever tangled in court betrayal. That's the kind of danger that sleeps at the foot of your bed. But not all of it is poison. Sometimes there are moments of real comfort. A laugh during dressing, a shared piece of candied ginger smuggled in from the kitchens, a song sung quietly while your hair is brushed. For a few minutes the court politics melt, and you remember you're just a woman surrounded by other women who also didn't choose this life. Some are just trying to survive in silk shoes that don't fit quite right. There's also a hierarchy among them, naturally. The mistress of the robes is at the top, overseeing the daily operations of your wardrobe and movements. She's your unofficial schedule keeper, etiquette enforcer, and sometimes your fiercest advocate, or worst enemy. Below her are the maids of honour, usually younger and unmarried, fluttering around with wide eyes and whispering dreams of being noticed by a handsome knight. And then there are the older women, widows, distant relatives, former favourites, who've seen 5 queens come and go and have no illusions about the job. a fringe detail that's oddly delightful. Sometimes your ladies develop elaborate in-jokes and gestures used to communicate across crowded halls. A fan snapped twice might mean that nobleman smells like goose fat, while adjusting your gloves could be code for "I'm bored, rescue me." These mini-languages are never written down, of course, but they're lifelines during endless ceremonies where your smile is frozen and your corset is slowly suffocating you. Over time, you learn to reward loyalty subtly. A favoured lady might be gifted a bolt of imported silk. Another gets assigned a prime seat at a feast. These aren't just niceties, they're signals. Everyone watches who you favour. Everyone wants to be next. If someone falls out of grace, it's noticed immediately. Her duties are reassigned. Her name stops coming up. Eventually she might be quietly sent back to her family, her trunks packed before you even have a chance to say goodbye. This brings us to a lingering scholarly debate. Did queens have real agency through their household staff, or were they merely figureheads surrounded by handlers? Some historians argue that a clever queen could control narratives and influence court politics by managing her ladies strategically. Others believe the queen's household was a cage of lace and courtesy, with real decisions made by men who considered embroidery more suitable than diplomacy. As usual, both can be true. You learn how to be heard through echoes, how to plant ideas, how to shape alliances by making sure the right lady repeats the right version of her events in the right corridor. It's exhausting. A 24/7 performance of grace, gratitude and guardedness. You cry less, you nod more. You stop reacting when one of your maids flinches at a name you thought was harmless. You develop the kind of poise that only comes from being surrounded by people who could ruin you with a single careless sentence. But you also grow sharper. You start learning who serves which factions, who's ambitious, who's scared. You notice the lady who stays up late writing letters. The one who always gets a little too close to your brother-in-law. The one who hides her intelligence behind a nervous laugh. You build your web, not of silk, but of whispered loyalty, of knowing when to hold a hand and when to let it go. Because here's the truth, no one told you as a little girl playing with dolls in the garden, the queen's greatest weapon isn't her crown or her beauty or even her womb. It's her memory. Breakfast, if you're lucky, is a warm oat cake, a slice of soft cheese, and something sweet. Figs in syrup maybe, or apples stewed with cinnamon, but most mornings you're not even hungry. The court has already been buzzing for hours, the priests are halfway through matins, and your stomach knots tighter than your laces. You sit at the high table flanked by noblewomen trying to look serene while chewing each bite like it might be poisoned. You're not paranoid of yeast, exactly, but you're also not naive. A queen can't afford either. Food in the medieval court is the theatre, much like everything else. It isn't about satisfying hunger. It's about status, symbolism, and surviving a menu that could stretch for 14 courses, most of them swimming in sauces and questionable spices. You don't just eat. You're seen eating. You're watched for what you eat, how much you eat, and whether you eat first. Because in the hierarchy of medieval feasting, the order of bites matters just as much as the taste. A typical royal meal is a sensory overload. Roasted swan served with feathers reattached for flair, spiced peacock glazed and shimmering like something out of a fever dream. Fish moulded into pastry towers stuffed with herbs and wild mushrooms. There's mead, of course, and wine diluted with snow, and pitchers of almond milk for the particularly pious. It sounds luxurious until you realise most of it has been cooked in kitchens with no chimneys, prepared by sweating men with knives and very loose ideas about hygiene. And once it hits your plate, you're supposed to pick at it daintily, smile, and carry on as though your intestines aren't bracing for impact. There's a proper way to eat everything. You dab at sauces with bits of bread called trenchers. You sip wine slowly between prayers. You keep your hands in view. If you drop something, someone will scurry to retrieve it, but God help you if you touch the floor yourself. And all the while, you must make conversation. Pleasant, effortless, diplomatic conversation. Even when your mouth is full of overcooked pheasant and your teeth are aching from all the preserved fruit. The real challenge isn't the food, it's the fasting. You're expected to follow the church calendar with holy rigour. That means no meat, dairy or eggs on certain days, sometimes for weeks on end. During Lent it's fish and more fish. Not the good kind either. We're talking salt cod so tough it could double as a roof tile. But you smile, you act like it's penance. Because piety is another kind of performance, and queens are expected to lead by example. even if their stomachs are rebelling quietly under layers of whalebone. Here's a historical fact that's both fascinating and unsettling. In some courts, pregnant queens were allowed to skip fasting, but only if a priest declared it safe for the child. So yes, your unborn baby has to be pre-approved by the church before you're allowed to eat a cheese tart. The moral weight of your meal is constantly evaluated by people who have never been pregnant, never worn a corset, and definitely never gone 12 hours without a snack. And yet food is power. Lavish feasts are how kings show their wealth, how nobles are bribed into loyalty, how treaties are celebrated. Your place at the table says everything. Are you seated next to the bishop or the foreign ambassador? Are you served before the duchess or after? Even your plate, gold, silver or pewter, signals your rank. A misplaced goblet can become court scandal. One spoiled dish could spark rumours of poison. You sit surrounded by platters of gilded goose and candied quince, and still you eat with suspicion. The fringe fun? Sometimes the food itself is a prank. Medieval chefs, bored out of their minds between wars, loved creating illusion foods, like fake eggs made from almond paste, meat pies that squawked when opened because live birds were hidden inside. Yes, someone actually thought, what if we made the dinner scream? And someone else said, brilliant. Of course, behind the spectacle is the daily grind. Your private meals are simpler. Broths, bread, poached out pears, maybe a bit of pigeon if you're lucky. Your ladies-in-waiting often eat with you, heads bowed, murmuring soft gossip between bites. There's a quiet rhythm to those moments. No trumpets, no toasts, just spoons tapping gently against ceramic, and a rare chance to let your shoulders drop. But even there, food is rarely just food. A certain dish might signal the king's mood. If eels are served, perhaps he's been in contact with his Flemish allies. If sweetmeats arrive unannounced, perhaps he's feeling guilty about something. You learn to read the menu like a language, coded, subtle, often bitter beneath the sugar. There's a debate among scholars about how much control queens had over their own kitchens. Some evidence suggests that certain queens managed vast culinary staff and chose what was served at their own tables. Others argue that food was a deeply gendered domain. Men ran the kitchens, designed the feasts, and the queen simply nodded and chewed. The truth likely varied. In wealthier courts, queens could wield significant influence through hospitality, offering rare delicacies to allies, fasting conspicuously to show piety, or even gifting spices as diplomatic gestures. After all, a pouch of saffron was worth more than gold in many regions. You start noticing how guests behave around food. Who waits for the blessing and who sneaks a bite. Who drinks too much before the third course. Who accidentally spills wine to the bishop. These details matter. In a place where emotions are outlawed and politics are whispered behind veils, the feast becomes a kind of theatre, and you're always centre stage. But tonight, you're tired. You've nodded through 7 courses, 3 toasts, and a poem read by a man with wine-stained lips and no sense of rhythm. Your temples are pulsing. You haven't tasted anything since the first bite. Your plate is still full. So you set down your spoon, murmur something about an early morning prayer, and excuse yourself. As you rise, the room hushes slightly, just for a beat. Your gown shimmers as you pass. Your ladies follow with precision. You don't trip, you don't sway, you don't pause, because a queen must always leave the table before the meal turns sour. Every day begins with a prayer, not because you're particularly holy, not yet, but because everyone around you expects it. The castle chapel is cold, always, no matter the season. Stone floors leach the heat from your slippers, and incense hangs in the air like a dense fog that clings to your veil. The priest begins his chant, his voice rising and falling like a lullaby, sung by a man who hasn't smiled since last Epiphany. You kneel, murmur along, and try to ignore the creeping numbness in your feet. This isn't just devotion, it's policy. Your piety is public property. You're a medieval queen, and religion is stitched into every corner of your existence. It dictates your meals, your clothing, your sex life, your bathing schedule, and even your childbirth practices. It defines your very identity as queen, not just a ruler's wife, but a sacred figure in her own right, chosen by God to birth and nurture the next anointed monarch. Divine right doesn't just apply to kings, it touches you too, albeit through the lens of obedience, humility, and endless ritual. Your confessor is one of the most powerful people in your life. He's part priest, part therapist, part informant, He hears your secrets, at least the ones you're brave enough to whisper, and offers forgiveness, or at least a stern lecture, and a prescribed number of Hail Marys. He might be kind, or cold, or just endlessly tired, but he's always there. A silent presence in your shadow, ready to remind you of your sins whether you asked or not. And don't think your confessions are just between the two of you. He's a cleric in service to the court. If your soul starts to sound too dangerous, word will reach the king. You wear religious jewellery, a cross perhaps, or a pendant containing a saint's bone fragment. Your rooms are decorated with holy imagery, a tapestry of the Virgin Mary over your bed, an altar in the corner lit with beeswax candles. You're expected to attend Mass almost daily, sponsor feast day celebrations, and oversee the charitable arm of the palace. Sick people, lepers, and pregnant peasant women are marched in front of you regularly. You touch them gently, offer a smile, hand over coins like you're dispensing divine favour, and in a way you are. Queens are supposed to embody mercy, but mercy has a dress code. You must look radiant while fasting. You must sing hymns through clenched teeth while your husband flirts with some baroness. You must give thanks to God even when you miscarry or lose your third child, or your father dies across the sea and you can't even attend his funeral. You kneel, and you pray, and you smile. The religious calendar rules everything. Advent, Epiphany, Lent, Easter, Pentecost, Assumption, All Saints. It's a carousel of feast and famine, celebration and sorrow. During Holy Week, you're not just expected to fast, you must also participate in public displays of humility. Some queens washed the feet of the poor, not symbolically, literally. 12 peasant women, scrubbed for the occasion, would sit in front of you while you poured lukewarm water over their cracked feet, gently dabbing them dry with embroidered cloth. All while a scribe took notes to add to the year's chronicle. It sounds noble, and maybe sometimes it even feels that way. But more often than not, it's exhausting. Your faith is weaponized by courtiers, clergy, your in-laws. If you speak too boldly, you're prideful. If you're quiet too long, you're either plotting or depressed. If you pray too much, you're pious. If you don't, you're ungodly. The same people who bow at your feet today will mutter about your vanity tomorrow. And so you maintain the perfect balance of holiness, visible, measured, soft around the edges. Historical side note. Queen Marguerite of Navarre wrote spiritual poems in secret. Beautiful philosophical musings about faith, doubt and divine love. But publicly she still wore the mask of ideal Catholic queen. Many noble women were deeply religious, but they had to pretend their insights came from visions or dreams. A scholarly woman couldn't be trusted. A holy woman? Much easier to digest. But not all of your religious experience is performative. In the quiet moments, when the chapel is empty and the wind howls through the cloisters, you do sometimes feel something real. You pray for your children, for your own health, for the safety of your siblings, for peace, and you don't always know who's listening. Sometimes you're not even sure anyone is, but the ritual helps. The rhythm, the candles, the Latin phrases you don't entirely understand. It gives shape to your fears. There's a long-standing scholarly debate about whether queens used religion as a genuine expression of faith or as a carefully managed political tool. Some historians argue queens leaned into religious life as a form of subtle resistance, building influence through convents, patronage, and spiritual networks. Others claim it was all theatre, all controlled by men, but honestly, for you, it's both. Religion is the language of power, but also the only place you're allowed to cry. You begin to build your own circle of religious advisors, not just the court-appointed chaplain, but mystics and abbots, abbesses from nearby convents, wandering friars with strange prophecies. Some bring comfort, others bring discomfort wrapped in incense and vague warnings. One tells you your dreams are omens, another says your last miscarriage was God testing your humility. You thank them all, you believe none of them fully, and yet you keep returning to the chapel. You light candles for the child you lost. You sing psalms during storms. You kiss the feet of stone saints and feel nothing. Then one morning you cry during the Agnus Dei and don't know why. Maybe it's real. Maybe it's hormonal. Maybe it's just the only place you're allowed to fall apart. Your confessor writes to Rome about your virtue. He says you are a pious queen, a model wordplurier, a jewel of the church. He says this with the same pen he uses to report your conversations to the cardinal. But still you let him write it. You need the protection. And besides, every queen needs a narrative. Yours for now is one of quiet holiness, whether or not it's true. You never really liked chess, not until now, not until you realised that at court the game isn't just entertainment, it's instruction, strategy, a mirrored version of your reality. The king is slow and cautious, moving one square at a time, protected on all sides. The knights prance around at odd angles. The bishops cut sharp diagonals across the board, holy but lethal. But it's the queen, who has the real power. Fast, flexible, devastating. She can go anywhere. So of course they made her the most dangerous piece. And of course no one wants to see you play her well. You sit under a canopy in the solar, sunlight pouring through diamond-paned windows, your skirts arranged in symmetrical folds. Your opponent is a visiting countess, or perhaps a courtly knight who knows better than to win. Around you the court lounges in calculated elegance, pretending not to watch as you slide your rook into position. Someone chuckles lightly, someone else makes a bet under their breath. It's all innocent fun, of course, just a game, just a queen entertaining herself, but every move you make is a message. I understand how this works, because you've figured it out now. The game at court is never just one game, it's dozens, played at once, layered over each other like velvet on armour. Power is everywhere, and it's never where you're told to look. A feast isn't just a feast, it's a loyalty test. A dance isn't just a dance, it's a tactical rehearsal. A compliment could be a trap, a silence could be deadly, and you're in the middle of all of it, threading your way through a minefield while smiling like it's spring. The king has his advisors, lords, knights, priests, the occasional terrifying uncle, but you have your web. You've learned who listens, who repeats, who misquotes. You know how to plant an idea in the morning and hear it echoed by sunset, whispered back to you like someone else's thought. Your influence doesn't come from orders. It comes from suggestion, from small favours, from being the person who remembers. Start small. A word of praise for a steward's daughter, a subtle nod during a council meeting, a carefully chosen gift to a baron's wife, perhaps a prayer book she didn't know you knew she wanted. These gestures ripple outward. You're not just the queen who wears nice dresses, you're the queen who sees. And people remember that. Historical queens understood this game well. Eleanor of Aquitaine didn't just sit quietly beside her husband. She manoeuvred alliances across France and England, turned her children into kings and queens, and still found time to sponsor poets. Catherine de' Medici used banquets and ballets as political theatre, each performance a move on the larger board. Their success wasn't because they held swords, it was because they held information. You start attending more councils, even when you're not technically invited. You sit in the back, hands folded, eyes attentive. You don't speak, at least not at first, but your presence alone changes things. Men fidget, arguments cool, someone always ends up explaining a decision to you later, just to keep you informed. And with each explanation you gather more pieces. You build your map. Then slowly you speak. Just one suggestion, one observation, something harmless. Shouldn't the grain reserves be checked before winter? They nod. They agree. It's common sense, but it's also yours. Your voice enters the room like a breeze no one noticed until it moved the curtains. You host salons in the evenings. Nothing formal, just chess, poetry, the occasional lute. But the guest list is precise. Every person there is someone you want to hear from, someone you want to distract. You serve rare delicacies from your own treasury, not the king's. You provide warmth, music, and gentle laughter. It feels casual. It's not. You are studying your nobles like a battlefield, watching where they stand, who they flatter, who they ignore. There's a fringe detail from a French court where the queen kept a notebook of courtly debts. Not financial, but social. Who owed her favours, who she had rescued from embarrassment, who had borrowed her scribe or her seamstress. She called it her Book of Obligations, and rumour has it was more effective than the kingdom's entire tax ledger. You begin to keep your own version, a mental tally perhaps, or small notes tucked between the pages of a psalter. Quiet leverage, just in case. Of course there are risks. If you move too boldly, they'll call you meddlesome. If you're too quiet, you'll be forgotten. You have to strike a delicate balance, present but not overpowering, gracious but not passive, and you can't contradict your husband. But you can reframe him. You mention his wisdom, his fairness, his generosity, especially when those qualities aren't in plain view. In doing so, you set expectations. You hold him to a version of himself that's more convenient for your plans. There's an ongoing scholarly debate over how much influence queens actually had. Some argue their power was mostly ceremonial, confined to patronage and household management. Others point to surviving letters, council records, and foreign accounts that show queens acting as political operators, brokers of alliances, even shadow diplomats. The truth likely shifts from queen to queen. But you know one thing for certain: silence is not absence. And influence doesn't always leave fingerprints. You begin writing letters, not just personal ones, but strategic correspondence, to abbesses, foreign noblewomen, cousins in distant courts. You don't write openly about politics. That would be improper. You write about children, about feast days, about common friends. And between the lines, in the careful phrasing, you lay out warnings, invitations, quiet shifts in alliance. A word here, a favour there. Ink becomes your sharpest blade. You're no longer playing defence, you're playing chess, real chess. Not the bored kind, but the kind that could win you loyalty, land safety, maybe even legacy. Because here's what no one tells you when they place the crown on your head. The queen may not rule the kingdom, but she knows exactly how it runs. The crowds are cheering again, which means you're doing your job, or at least looking like you are. You sit tall in the carved, velvet-draped carriage, hands folded perfectly in your lap, your expression soft but aloof, just the right amount of palpable detachment. Outside, peasants wave branches and shout blessings, though most are just hoping for a coin toss or a glimpse of your jewels. You smile, never too wide. A queen should always appear gracious, but not giddy. You must look like something gaggy, admired, unreachable, not quite real. Public appearances are your regular performance now. Processions, dedications, visits to churches and monasteries, parades during feast days. You're a walking, breathing icon of royal stability. And if you're not present, people notice. If you miss a celebration, they whisper. If you appear late to mass, they wonder if you're ill. Or worse, if you're pregnant again, or not pregnant again. Either way, they make it a conversation. You have no real say in where you go. The king's advisors plan your outings. The master of the wardrobe decides what you wear. Priests draft your blessings. Guards map your route down to the pace of your horses. You're essentially a royal puppet with a crown-shaped hood. But the public doesn't see that. They see splendour, gauzy grace, power, and most of all, hope. You are the mother of the realm, the moral compass of the court, the shining image of God's order brought to earth. They don't need to know how tired you are. And you are tired. Every outing is hours of work. Posing, walking, listening to long sermons in cold cathedrals, accepting flowers from sticky-handed children whose parents are whispering about taxes and famine. You kneel before altars, accept dedications, break bread with abbots and say, "May God bless your harvest," while knowing full well the grain stores are 3 days from empty. But the spectacle matters. Medieval monarchies are built on image as much as authority. Your public appearances reassure the people that the kingdom is strong, moral, and under divine favour. The king might be away, hunting or waging a half-hearted war, but you are here, reminding them that someone is watching, someone is praying for them. You're not just ornamental, you're symbolic. And yet, despite all the fanfare, you sign nothing. You enact no laws. You sit beside the throne, but never on it. You have titles, endless, flowery titles, but they come with no real power, just the illusion of it. Unless the king grants it, unless the council approves, unless you happen to be regent during a war, or while your son is still teething. Historical fact: Queen Philippa of Hainault, wife of Edward III, once rode out in armour to plead with her husband to spare a captured town. She wasn't part of the king's council. She didn't command troops, but her public performance, kneeling before the king in front of the townspeople, moved him to mercy. That's what queens do, influence outcomes not by force but by presence. Persuasion wrapped in protocols. It's a strange cage, made of silk and incense. You're adored but not consulted, praised but not obeyed. You give speeches someone else wrote. You attend ceremonies someone else planned. You nod while clerics recite your own prayers back to you. And yet if you show even the slightest hesitation, if your smile falters, or you forget the words to the Magnificat, people notice. They assume scandal, or rebellion, or sin. Your household staff knows the routine. Before each outing, your hair is arranged like a living sculpture. Your gown is brushed and stitched and scented. Your hands rubbed with rose oil to hide the rough patches no queen is supposed to have. Even your horse, if you ride, is fitted with a saddle draped in crimson cloth embroidered with your family crest. You are packaged like a holy object. One false move and the whole illusion risks shattering. There's a fringe practice that's both fascinating and a little ridiculous. In some royal courts, the Queen's footsteps were tracked, literally. On major feast days, her shoes were dusted with fine flour so that her steps left visible prints on the floor of the cathedral or palace. People would rush to kneel in them afterward, hoping to absorb some measure of holiness or favour, as if your shoes hadn't been filled with blisters 15 minutes into the procession. And the pressure goes beyond the public. You're also expected to host the nobility in style. Lavish dinners, tournaments, masked balls, all of them planned to reinforce your family's wealth and your husband's dominion. If a foreign envoy visits, you must flatter them in their own language. If a bishop drops by, you must quote scripture and offer gifts. One poorly executed dinner could offend an entire duchy. One misstep in etiquette could jeopardize an alliance. It's not just showing up and smiling, it's diplomacy and brocade. Scholars have long debated whether queens were complicit in the performance of power or victims of it. Some argue that queens manipulated court ritual to their advantage, using public devotion and ceremonial events to build influence. Others argue that these performances only reinforced their lack of real agency, trapping them in a gilded role with no escape. But you're beginning to see the truth for what it is. The performance is the power. If you play it right, you've learned how to make subtle statements. You wear a foreign fabric on a feast day when trade negotiations are fragile. You kiss a peasant child's forehead in a region known for rebellion. You choose a religious relic associated with healing when plague rumours are spreading. Nothing you do is accidental, and even when you are acting out of instinct or fatigue, the court will find meaning in it, so you may as well give them something useful to interpret. And then there are the moments that almost feel real. When you lock eyes with a girl in the crowd and she beams like you're a blessing sent from heaven. When a widow grips your hand and thanks you for remembering her husband's name. When you hear the bells ringing your arrival and just for a second feel like maybe you belong in this world of velvet and candles. But the moment never lasts. Someone always clears their throat. The carriage jerks forward, your veil slips slightly, and a lady in waiting darts forward to adjust it. The crowd cheers louder. You sit back, spine straight, face composed. The Queen is watching, but she is also being watched. Always. He's gone again. The King, your husband, your sovereign, whatever title you're supposed to whisper with reverence when his name comes up in prayer or at dinner. He's off riding into a war you weren't asked about, or maybe just inspecting distant estates and asserting dominance over nobles with rebellious eyebrows. Wherever he is, he left without much of a farewell, maybe a kiss on the cheek, maybe not. He rode out with his retinue of knights and squires and banners flapping like birdwings, leaving behind a castle echoing with too much silence and a court that suddenly turns its full attention to you. When the king is away, the queen sometimes rules. Not always, not officially. But if the kingdom doesn't crumble in his absence, someone has to keep the wheels turning. And guess who's still here, sitting on a cushion that never quite feels comfortable, surrounded by men who smile too much and clerics who talk in riddles. You don't sign laws, not without his seal, but you might oversee petitions, respond to correspondence, and make sure the grain shipments actually arrive in the right province. You listen to disputes between local nobles, play hostess to foreign dignitaries, and lead prayer services for the king's safe return. You nod through council meetings where half the men pretend not to hear you, and the other half act like everything you say is revolutionary, even when it's just common sense. And through it all, you are watched. Especially now. When the king is gone, every choice you make is magnified. Every glance, every whispered word, every decision questioned. The courtiers lean in closer, trying to sniff out weakness or opportunity. Are you overstepping? Are you faltering? Is your tone too sharp, too soft? And if a letter from the king arrives with vague instructions, you're expected to interpret it flawlessly. If no letter comes at all, you're still supposed to know exactly what he'd want. Queen, meet mind reading. It's your new full-time job. Some queens handled this transition with ruthless efficiency. Blanche of Castile acted as regent for her young son Louis IX and effectively ran France during his minority. She managed finances, quelled rebellions, and held court like a seasoned general wrapped in pearls. Others weren't so lucky. A misplaced judgment, a poorly timed letter, and suddenly the court turned hostile, accusing the queen of ambition, arrogance, or worse, treasonous intent. Because when you wield power as a woman, it's never just power. It's always suspect. You sit at the head of the Great Hall now, his chair beside you ominously empty. The nobles glance at it more than they glance at you. Some of them defer to your decisions out of respect, or fear of being noticed not deferring. Others just wait for you to make a mistake. And a few, the clever ones, test you. They bring you trivial matters to see how you'll respond. A dispute over grazing rights, a conflict between two minor houses, a border skirmish that's probably been festering for years. If you dismiss it, you're careless. If you intervene, you're meddling. So you learn to tread lightly and speak slowly. You echo your husband's past decisions when it suits you. You invoke his name when you need to remind them you can wield his authority, indirectly. And when it feels safe, you make your own call, something small, something precise, something that will go unnoticed until it works. Back in your chambers, the real work happens. You meet with your steward, your chaplain, your private secretary. You read letters meant for the king, scan reports on harvests and merchant taxes, approve repairs to roads and bridges. The decisions aren't glamorous, but they're vital. You don't hold court with a sword in your hand. You hold it with ledgers and seals and memorise names of men who think you've forgotten them. You haven't. There's a strange fringe fact here. Some queens, while acting as regents or interim rulers, had their own secretaries write letters in the king's voice. The seal, the tone, the phrasing, all matched to what the king would have said, even if he was nowhere near a quill. This wasn't deception. It was expected. You kept the machine running until the king returned and took credit for what you did. You wonder sometimes if he'll notice. If he'll ask how you managed to keep the southern provinces from starving or why the bishop's complaints suddenly stopped. But mostly he doesn't. He returns with blood on his boots and a fresh scar on his temple and sits down in his chair like you never left. The nobles cheer. The banners are lowered. And you move one seat over again, smiling as if you didn't just keep the kingdom breathing. Scholars debate whether queens ruling in their husband's absence held real executive power or merely served as placeholders. The answer, as always, is both. You have no power on paper but immense power in motion. The quills, the silences, the side-eye across the council table, they all add up to influence, not authority, but close enough when used properly. You learn the names of villages you'll never visit, lords you've never met, problems you'll never solve fully. You make peace with the unfinished. You master the art of suggestion. You sign letters with phrases like, "in accordance with His Majesty's known wishes," even when you have no idea what his wishes would have been. You become fluent in the politics of maybe, and sometimes, just sometimes, things go right. The grain arrives on time, the nobles quiet down, the tax dispute disappears, and in the quiet glow of the evening, while the fire crackles in the hearth and your steward brings news of a minor victory, you feel something close to pride. You've held the court together. You've kept the chaos at bay. And the best part? No one knows how hard it really was, because you made it look easy, which means you played the role perfectly. Court is not a place for friendship. It's a place for proximity, performance, and politely veiled threats wrapped in brocade. And nowhere is that more obvious than in your own halls, among the ladies who smile too hard and the lords who linger just a little too long in conversation. You learn quickly that rivalries aren't just petty squabbles. They are warfare conducted with fans and curtsies, envy disguised as etiquette. And often your fiercest enemies don't sit across the table. They sit right next to you. One of your biggest threats might be family. Your sister, for example, brought to court as a companion, young and clever and glowing with that sort of effortless charm that makes courtiers lean in and bishops lose their train of thought. She smiles at you like she used to in the nursery, but her eyes measure everything. Your robes, your jewellery, your place beside the king. She might love you. She might want your crown. The two are not mutually exclusive, and then there are the stepchildren. If your husband had previous wives, and many medieval kings did, he probably brought their children to court. They're polite, of course, trained from birth in the ways of deference. But every time you look at them, you see the eyes of the woman who came before you. You're not their mother. You never will be. And if your husband's affection for them runs deep, that becomes leverage they can use against you. Especially if they're grown. Especially if they want the throne. Don't underestimate the religious figures either. The abbess who visits every feast day. The young nun who was once your husband's cousin. The bishop's niece with the miraculous singing voice and suspiciously expensive prayer books. These women don't need to shout or scheme. Their weapons are subtler. Whispered judgments about your piety, strategic charity, devotion that turns into popularity. Nothing burns quite like holiness sharpened into a dagger. Court intrigue feels like theatre at first. It's all arch looks and careful wording, subtle snubs at banquets, compliments with invisible hooks. That colour suits you so well, Your Grace. It hides the exhaustion beautifully. But beneath the velvet gloves, it's all claws. One look, one rumour, one small error in judgment, and you're slipping down a ladder you didn't even know you were climbing. And let's talk rumours. They spread faster than fire and cling longer than perfume. One day you're the gracious queen who handed out bread during Lent. The next, you're the cold foreigner who favours your own people and gives the crown's money to her cousins. Maybe someone saw you laughing with a young knight in the corridor. Maybe someone claims they saw you crying in the chapel. Doesn't matter if it's true. The story gets told and retold, and every time you're painted just a shade darker. There's a fringe story about a queen whose maid accused her of feeding her husband a love potion in his wine. Not because it happened, but because the maid had been dismissed for stealing a hairbrush. Within a week, the court was buzzing with tales of sorcery and seduction. The queen had to hold a public mass and take communion barefoot just to prove her soul wasn't dancing with the devil. Court life is fun like that. You try to build allies, you reward loyalty, you share confidences carefully, you compliment daughters of powerful houses, but no alliance is forever. Someone's favour today is someone else's betrayal tomorrow. You might be close to a duchess for 5 years, and then find out she's been sending letters to your husband's mistress the entire time. You might take in a poor noblewoman after her father's execution, only to have her repay you by stealing a locket from your bedside. And when you confront her, she'll cry. Of course she'll cry. That's the final twist of the knife. Every now and then you do make a real friend. A woman who understands the tightrope walk, who's smart enough not to cling too closely, but steady enough to hold your gaze across the hall and remind you that you're not completely alone. These bonds are rare, and you guard them fiercely. But even then, you keep a part of yourself hidden. Not because you want to, because you have to. Scholars often argue about the nature of female rivalry in royal courts. Was it born of powerlessness, or was it simply politics? Did queens and noblewomen fight each other because they had no better outlet, or because they knew exactly how to compete? The answer, as usual, is complicated. Women at court learned to navigate power in whatever ways were allowed, and sometimes those paths ran straight through each other. You grow wary of praise, suspicious of gifts. Every embroidered handkerchief might have a message stitched into it. Every poem recited at dinner could be mocking you between the rhymes. A compliment from a rival is like sugar on poisoned fruit. You smile, thank her, and toss it into the fire later, just in case. Even the king can become a rival in his own way. If he starts to believe you're too clever, too popular, too independent, he might begin to pull back. He might replace your ladies with his own. He might humiliate you publicly, revoke your funding, or suddenly decide that your influence is dangerous. You learn to temper your victories. Celebrate quietly. Accept credit with humility, always attributing your ideas to His Majesty's wisdom. And still you endure. You outmaneuver. You survive. Because the truth no one speaks aloud is this. In a court full of masks, the Queen's mask must never slip. You must smile at your enemy while planning her downfall. You must cry in private and laugh in public. You must pretend not to notice the dagger being passed behind your back. You must forgive, or at least perform forgiveness, because vengeance, when it comes, must arrive disguised as divine justice. It's exhausting, it's cruel, it's unrelenting, and it is exactly how the game is played. It begins with a dull ache low in your belly, the kind that wraps around your spine and sits there like a stone. You say nothing at first. You're too used to discomfort, corsets, ceremonies, court politics. What's one more strange twinge in a body you've barely had control over since you were 14? But within an hour the ache sharpens. By midday you can't walk without gripping the edge of your chair, and by sunset the midwives are lighting candles and bustling around your chamber, whispering to each other in clipped, tense tones. You're in labour. Again. No matter how many times it happens, the fear never fades. Childbirth in your world is a gamble, a brutal, bloody lottery where the prize is survival, and the cost is everything. You've already buried one child, maybe 2, maybe more. Miscarriages happen quietly here, often unspoken, written off as God's will. You remember them all, their names never given, their rooms never prepared, just a trail of shadows behind each pregnancy that make the next feel even more fragile. This time everyone says things will be different. They always do. They bring the best midwives, the softest sheets, the most expensive herbs ground into bitter pastes and slipped beneath your tongue. But behind every soothing word, every blessing and prayer is the truth you know too well. Childbirth kills women, especially queens. Yes, even you, even with the candles and the saints' relics and the walls thick enough to drown out screams. It happens all the time. Somewhere, right now, another queen is dying in a blood-soaked bed while her courtiers argue about succession in the hallway. You've read the stories. You've seen the looks the older noblewomen give you when your belly swells. Half sympathy, half dread. The lying-in chamber is stifling. All light is blocked, all noise softened. Tapestries hang over the windows to ward off evil spirits. An icon of the Virgin Mary watches from the corner, her painted eyes wide with pity. Your ladies in waiting hover like nervous ghosts, fanning you, murmuring prayers, offering warm cloths and sips of wine that taste like smoke and fear. When the pain comes, it's not in waves. It's a rising tide, crushing and constant. You scream, of course, you curse, you beg. Even queens lose dignity when their body is tearing itself open. You grip the arm of a maid until her skin bruises. You bite down on your own knuckles. Hours pass, maybe days. You lose time. At some point a physician appears. He doesn't speak to you directly, only to your midwife. He frowns. There's blood. Too much blood. Someone says something about the position of the baby. Someone else lights more candles. You hear the word breach and your heart cracks open. You know what that means. You've seen what happens. But somehow, miraculously, it ends. You hear a cry, thin and wet and full of fury. You weep, not from joy, but from sheer exhaustion. A maid presses a warm bundle against your chest. "A daughter," she says, like it's an apology. And it is, sort of, because a girl means another pregnancy, another chance at a boy, another trip through this hell. Still you hold her, you kiss her downy head, you call her something beautiful, something strong, because even if no one else values her, you will. She is yours, and in that moment everything else, the pain, the risk, the fear, fades. Later the court responds predictably. A girl, the smiles are thinner, the feasting is quieter, the congratulatory letters arrive more slowly, and most include some variation of, "May God bless you with a son soon," as if she's not enough, as if you're not enough. You pretend not to care. You smile, you sit in the nursery with your newborn, while wet nurses hover and noble women gossip just outside the door. You go through the motions, christening, naming, gifting tiny embroidered gowns, and inside you count the days until your husband appears again, asking when you'll try for another. A historical aside here, both fascinating and cruel. In some courts, queens were expected to immediately resume public appearances even after difficult births. One chronicler noted that a queen greeted the court 3 days after lying in with composure and painted cheeks, which sounds impressive until you realise the paint was probably covering bruises and her gown was hiding blood-stained bandages. Scholars still argue about the risk queens faced in childbirth. Some say it was no worse than for any other noblewoman. Others point out that the pressure to produce heirs made the danger even greater, with queens forced into back-to-back pregnancies before their bodies could recover. You're inclined to side with the latter. Your back aches, your skin hasn't stopped bleeding, and they're already discussing your next lying in. And yet, there's power in this pain. Not political power exactly, at least not yet, but something deeper. You've survived something many don't. You've given life, you've held it in your arms, and in a world that values you only for what your body can produce, that act becomes your rebellion. You don't forget the ones who didn't survive. Queens and commoners alike. You light candles for them in the chapel, say their names in your head during morning prayer. You remember Queen Jane Seymour, who gave Henry VIII his precious son and died 12 days later, white-lipped and fevered. You remember them all, and you promise yourself, if you survive again, if you must endure this all over, you'll find a way to make it mean something. Because if childbirth is your battlefield, then you will wear every scar like armour. The rules say you must be faithful, utterly, perfectly faithful. Your body belongs to the king, your thoughts belong to God, and anything that falls outside those lines is heresy, treason, or worse, gossip material. But just because the rules are carved in stone doesn't mean they're followed. Certainly not by your husband, whose version of fidelity tends to dissolve the moment a noblewoman tilts her head the right way at a feast. The hypocrisy is so thick you could spread it on bread. The court is a theatre of flirtation. Everything is coded. A glance across the hall, the brush of a sleeve. the way a hand lingers just a moment too long when offering a goblet. Love poetry circulates like contraband. Half of it is original, the other half is borrowed from dead troubadours and passed off as compliments. You receive anonymous verses folded inside prayer books. Some are harmless, others not so much. You're expected to ignore it all, smile, deflect, play the innocent. If someone admires your beauty, you thank them modestly and redirect the conversation. If someone offers more than words, an invitation to meet in the garden at dusk, for instance, you pretend you didn't hear it. Queens don't entertain such things, not unless they're foolish or desperate, or sometimes just human. Because here's the secret whispered behind closed doors and embroidered veils. Some queens do have affairs. Not many, not often, but it happens, quietly, carefully, with the kind of precision usually reserved for smuggling letters or committing fraud. You learn to read the castle not as a home, but as a maze of eyes, of ears, of unlocked doors that might open at just the wrong moment. And if you do find yourself tempted, truly tempted, it's never with the kind of men who leave sonnets on your windowsill. It's usually someone who sees you before the crown, maybe a knight who's watched you fall asleep in the garden with a book, maybe a scholar who talks to you like you actually have thoughts of your own. Maybe it's no one, but the possibility is always there, quiet and dangerous, like the shadow of a dagger behind a curtain. Historical fact. Queen Isabella of France, wife of Edward II, was accused, though never conclusively proven, of taking a lover, Roger Mortimer. Their supposed affair led to a full-blown rebellion, a deposition, and eventually the murder of Edward. Whether it was love, ambition, or survival we'll never know. What we do know is that once the rumour began, it never died. Because in the court's imagination, a queen's desire is never innocent. It's always a threat. The double standard is so blatant it's almost laughable. Your husband can have mistresses openly. He can father illegitimate children who receive titles and lands. His dalliances are shrugged off as masculine indulgences. Yours, real or imagined, are scandals that echo through time. One misplaced glance and suddenly you're a harlot in the eyes of God and the realm. That's the real danger. Not just the act itself, but the accusation. A queen doesn't need to commit adultery to suffer for it. The mere suspicion is enough. That's why every step you take is measured, every laugh weighed, every man within 3 feet of you catalogued. If you speak too kindly to your confessor, you're accused of seducing the church. If you sit too close to your steward, the castle starts buzzing. Even your own letters, if they were too poetic, too personal, can be held against you. You're not even safe from the ink on your own fingers. A fringe example. In some courts, queens were assigned noble women as moral chaperones, whose actual job was to report back to the king's advisors, not protect you, monitor you. One such lady reportedly wrote daily notes on her queen's mood, meals and nighttime visitors, even though the only visitor was a lapdog with arthritis. And yet, in the middle of all this suspicion and surveillance, people still expect you to be charming, warm, engaging. You must dance at feasts, compliment ambassadors, laugh at the jesters' jokes, and make everyone feel welcome. But not too welcome, not too warm, not too clever. You must flirt without flirting, dazzle without inviting. It's like trying to balance on the edge of a knife while smiling. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how much personal freedom queens really had. Some say the constraints were total, unrelenting chastity, complete isolation, endless scrutiny. Others argue that queens found ways to navigate the system, forming private relationships and quiet rebellions, often under the protection of religion, art, or coded language. The truth, as always, lives somewhere in the shadows. So you master the game. You learn to tilt your head at just the right angle to look friendly but not inviting. You learn to speak in riddles, soft compliments that mean nothing, polite laughter that reveals nothing. You become the queen who is adored, admired, but always slightly out of reach. The ideal, the unattainable, the myth. And yet, late at night, when the halls are quiet and your chamber is thick with the scent of roses and candle wax, you allow yourself to feel it. The loneliness, the weight, the human ache that no amount of protocol can erase. Maybe you lie awake wondering what it would be like to be kissed for no reason at all, to be touched without the weight of expectation, to be seen, not as a vessel, a symbol, a crown, but as you. But you push the thought away. You remind yourself what's at stake. One moment of carelessness, one secret letter, and your name could become a scandal that spans centuries. You've read about queens who gambled for love and lost their heads. You won't be one of them, you can't afford to be. So instead, you take out a pen and write a poem that no one will ever read. You fold it carefully, slip it into a drawer behind your psalter, and lock it away. Because the heart of a queen is a fortress no one's allowed to breach. Not even the queen herself. You don't talk about it, not out loud anyway, but the castle is full of ghosts. Some are the usual kind, the ones you can blame on creaky floorboards or flickering torchlight. But most are quieter, more persistent. They live in your memory, not your hallways. They follow you in the silence between prayers, in the pauses between court laughter, in the stillness that lingers just before dawn. You've buried too much not to be haunted. Your first ghost is small. She would have been 4 by now, with curls like yours and a stubborn mouth. You think about her sometimes when you see the stable boys playing with sticks, chasing geese across the courtyard. She never drew breath outside of you. The priest said it was God's will, the midwife said you'd have more, but none of them stayed up that night, bleeding in candlelight, waiting to hear a cry that never came. You did, and you remember. There are other ghosts too. Sisters who died in childbirth, friends who fell from favour and vanished, courtiers who smiled at you one morning and were hanged by dusk. The kingdom moves on like it's nothing. The castle walls get scrubbed, the banners get changed, but you remember every name, every silence. And then there's the king, your husband, whose absence sometimes feels more spectral than any death. He's alive, yes, loud, present, physically unmissable when he wants to be. But other times, he's a void. You sit beside him at feasts and feel colder than when you kneel alone in the chapel. He speaks across you more than to you. He speaks of you more than with you. And you begin to wonder, is it worse to lose someone to death or to watch them drift from you while still breathing? Still, you do your duty. You wear black when told. You visit tombs. You fund masses for the dead, light candles, say names with care. But grief is a private thing. Too private for a queen. You're allowed to mourn, but only for the right amount of time. Mourn too briefly and you're heartless. Mourn too long and you're suspicious. The court watches everything, especially your tears. Especially when they don't come. One of the crueler truths of queenship is this. The people you lose often become tools in other people's games. Your dead child becomes a political weapon. Proof that your womb is cursed, or that the king needs a new wife. Your dead brother becomes a rallying point for a faction you never agreed with. Your grief is not your own. It is repackaged, repurposed, and paraded through court like a trophy. Historical footnote. Anne of Brittany, Queen of France, buried 7 of her children before the age of 30. 7, and still she was expected to smile, to host banquets, to represent fertility and grace and the ideal mother of France. Her public image remained immaculate, even as she walked through life draped in mourning veils. You begin to understand why some queens turn inward, why they retreat to private chapels and cloisters, not because they're devout, not entirely, but because it's the only space left where they can break down. You start slipping away more often too, you feign headaches. You develop a fondness for dusk walks in the herb garden, where no one asks questions if you cry under the lavender. There's a fringe belief circulating among some court women that ghosts can attach to you if you mourn too fiercely, that every sob you swallow is another thread binding them to your soul. You don't believe it, not really. But you do wonder sometimes, when the hall is too quiet or a breeze moves your curtains at midnight, how many invisible hands trail your steps, how many voices are folded into the hush of your chamber. The dead aren't your only burdens. The living too carry weight. Your children are growing. You see your son with his tutor reciting Latin like he was born for it, too young to know how many people would rather see him fail. You see your daughter adjusting her veil and looking in the mirror like she already knows she'll be married off the moment it suits the council. They are loved, yes, but also watched, groomed, judged. You'd give anything to keep them innocent longer. But that's not how the game works. There's a scholarly debate around whether queens were allowed to express personal grief freely. Some argue that mourning rituals were elaborate forms of expression. Black veils, funeral processions, yearly commemoration. Others suggest that these were simply performances, with real emotions stifled behind protocol and politics. In truth, it was both. Mourning was a script, yes, but sometimes the lines became real. You find strange comfort in repetition, lighting the same candle each day, saying the same prayer, touching the same piece of jewellery, a ring from your sister long gone. These rituals ground you, they remind you that you're still here. still breathing, and sometimes you even find moments of peace, watching your son sleep, hearing your daughter laugh like nothing's ever been broken, watching the sun slide across the stone floors of the chapel, while incense curls into the rafters. In those moments the ghosts fall quiet, but they never leave. You carry them with you, stitched into your hems, folded into your sighs, layered beneath every smile you give at court. You mourn in silence, you grieve in beauty, and you endure, because you're not allowed to fall apart, not in public, not as a queen. It doesn't start with shackles, it starts with silence. One day your name isn't called at the council meeting, your usual carriage isn't prepared for the cathedral procession. A letter arrives from the king's steward, terse and unsigned, telling you that your presence is no longer required at certain affairs of state. It's not exile, not yet, but it's something close. The court doesn't gasp, it doesn't rebel, it just adjusts around your absence like a door slowly closing. You know what this is, you're being sidelined. Perhaps it's a rumour that finally caught traction, a flirtation spun into scandal, a cousin's rebellion blamed on your bloodline. Maybe your last miscarriage disappointed too many people. Maybe your enemies whispered as just the right words in the king's ear. Or maybe, simpler still, he's bored. Kings don't need reasons, they only need momentum. And right now, yours is slipping. You're moved to a smaller chamber. Your personal servants are reassigned, their loyalties questioned behind closed doors. Your jewels, technically crown property, are politely reclaimed for inventory by Nehoshas. The message is clear, you're no longer in favour. The queen in name, yes, but not in presence, not in purpose. Then comes the letter, always a letter, sealed with the king's crest, addressed in someone else's hand. The phrasing is careful, you are invited to take residence at a royal manor for your health and peace of mind. It's not a command, not exactly, but disobey, and it will be. You pack what you're allowed to bring, a few gowns, a small chest of books, religious texts, maybe a pet hound if the king is feeling merciful. You kiss your children goodbye in a hallway where no one meets your eyes. Your son clutches your hand longer than he's supposed to. Your daughter doesn't understand what's happening. You lie to both of them, because queens lie beautifully. The carriage ride is quiet, too quiet. Guards ride beside you, not unfriendly but distant, not protectors, watchers. You arrive at your new residence, a stone manor with wide halls and shuttered windows. You're not chained, you're not confined to a cell, but you are not free. This isn't a prison, but it is a cage. Historically, this fate was surprisingly common. Queens who became inconvenient were often sent away, officially for rest, unofficially to remove them from sight. Eleanor of Aquitaine was imprisoned for over 15 years after rebelling against her husband. Catherine of Aragon was forced into isolation when Henry VIII wanted Anne Boleyn. You're in good company. Your daily life shrinks, you wake at dawn, say your prayers, read until your eyes blur. Meals are served by silent hands, the food is plain, respectable. There's always enough, but nothing tastes like anything. No music, no festivals, no court. The silence becomes your second skin. Letters are censored or intercepted. You write to your children but receive no replies. You write to your sister and the ink comes back smeared, the seal broken. You start hiding notes in the margins of psalms, slipping prayers between verses. You're not trying to be clever. You're trying to exist. Your ladies, what's left of them, do what they can. One of them hums songs from court as she brushes your hair. Another brings flowers from the outer gardens and names them, as if the act of remembering will bring them back to life. You try to be grateful, but everything feels like it's slipping through your fingers. There's a fringe tale of a queen who carved messages into her chamber wall using a hairpin and candle soot. She wrote names, dates, half-formed prayers. When she died, the wall was whitewashed. History doesn't record what she wrote, only that she wrote something. You think of her when you scratch your name into the wood beneath your writing desk. It's childish, petty, but it's yours. The days stretch long, but the nights are worse. The wind howls like it remembers something you've forgotten. You lie awake wondering if you'll be here forever. If the king will name a new queen. If your son will be taught to forget you. If your daughter will be married off without you there to fix her veil. And worst of all, you begin to wonder if you deserve this. If you are too proud, too clever, too visible. If your silence now is the price for your voice before. There's a scholarly debate over what exile meant for queens. Was it punishment, protection, or political theatre? Some say it was mercy, a way to avoid bloodshed. Others call it slow-motion execution, a polite form of erasure. You lean toward the latter. Queens weren't often burned or beheaded, but they could be buried in life. But even here, even in the stillness, you're not broken. Not yet. You begin to write. Nothing grand, just thoughts, dreams, details of the court you're afraid you'll forget. The way the king twisted his ring when nervous. The scent of the chapel at Advent. The lullaby you sang to your daughter the night before you were sent away. You keep these notes hidden, tucked into bindings, slipped behind bricks, rolled into hollow candlesticks. You don't know who will find them, you only know that someone must. One day the guards hesitate at your door. Something has changed, a shift in the air. A new messenger arrives. Not a letter this time, but a person, a trusted one. Someone who still says your grace with meaning. They kneel, they whisper, and you realise the king is dying, or has died, or is too weak to rule. Suddenly, your seance becomes a void that must be filled. And someone, maybe your son, maybe the council, maybe the people, remembers you. Not as the forgotten queen, but as the one they need now. You return to court under a sky that doesn't look like it remembers you. The banners are the same, the gates still swing on the same creaking hinges, but everything feels slightly off. Like you've stepped into a play you once performed, but someone changed all the lines. You are the queen again, technically. The guards bow, the servants curtsy, your name appears on documents. But it's not reverence they show you, it's calculation. They're all wondering what kind of queen you'll be now, after the exile, after the silence, after your fall from grace and slow resurrection, and most importantly, if you've forgiven them. You haven't, but you know better than to say it out loud. Your return is wrapped in ceremony, as though absence is something to be celebrated. The priests chant, the bells ring, nobles line up to offer carefully crafted words that all mean the same thing. I'm still here. Please don't ruin me. You smile and pretend it's all fine, that the long months in that cold manor didn't hollow you out, that you're thrilled to be back, that you don't remember who turned their faces away when you were cast out. You do, every single one. But the hardest part, you're a foreign queen again, all over again. You've returned to a place that never really claimed you, and the language of power has shifted while you were gone. Even your accent, once softened by proximity, feels foreign in your own mouth. Whispers trail behind your every step. They think your time away made you weaker, softer. But in truth, it burned away your last illusions. You're not here to please anymore, you're here to endure. Foreign queens have always had it worse. Even at the height of your favour, you were a novelty at best, a threat at worst. The court tolerated your customs with polite disinterest, your holidays, your saints, your languages. But they never truly absorbed you. The kitchen staff still mutters about your odd spices. The old women still blame your foreign blood for each unseasonal storm, each sudden illness. You are the queen, yes, but not quite their queen. And now that you're back, that suspicion has grown teeth. There are poems being passed around, crude little rhymes about your exile and return. Some make you a tragic heroine, others a sorceress returned from the grave. You're too clever, they say, too quiet, too foreign. You wear different colours, you speak differently. You make them uneasy, and uneasy people are dangerous. One courtier whispers about witchcraft, another mutters about unnatural patience, because that's the thing, they expect fallen queens to cry, to fade, to wither. But you came back with your spine intact and your smile sharpened. You sit straighter than before. You speak less, but each word lands like a dropped goblet in a silent room. There's a fringe belief still lingering among the common folk, that foreign queens bring bad harvests, that the soil itself can feel your strangeness. A baker leaves out a salt loaf near your carriage, a half gesture meant to cleanse your presence. You step over it without a glance. They want omens? Fine. Let them wonder what kind of storm you've brought back with you. And yet, despite all this, some are quietly glad you've returned. They remember the queen who gave alms to the leper colony, who saved a merchant's daughter from an unjust trial, who kept the eastern villages from starving 2 winters ago. Their eyes follow you in the hall. They wait to see if you'll take up the reins again, if you'll speak. But you don't rush, you watch, listen. Relearn the rhythm of court life, which is somehow both unchanged and entirely different. A new favourite now stands close to the king's chair. Your son, nearly grown, suddenly important. You study him. Does he still trust you? Has he been taught to fear you in your absence? And then there are your old rivals, now dressed in deeper colours and sharper jewels. One duchess has taken to quoting scripture in your presence, as if your exile somehow made her holier. Another offers you a sapphire pin in memory of better days. You thank her and tuck it into your sleeve, already deciding whether to melt it down or have it blessed by a bishop just to spite her. You resume some of your old duties, hosting visiting noblewomen, managing parts of the Queen's household, overseeing charity projects. Nothing bold, nothing dangerous. But behind each quiet act is a quiet message. I'm still here, I'm watching, I remember. Scholars argue over the treatment of foreign queens. Some claim the prejudice was cultural misunderstanding. Others say it was deliberate marginalisation to keep royal women in check. You don't need to read parchment to know the truth. You lived it. You live it still. The food they serve you is different. The maids speak slower around you, as if your ears forgot how to listen. Every gesture reminds you, you're not from here, and that means you're never safe here. But in that distance lies power, too, because being outside the system means you can see its cracks. You know where the alliances are fragile. You know who talks to who fears being exposed, who owes money, who's cheating on whom. You're not welcome, but you are necessary. There's a term the scribes don't use, but you think of it often. Queen in exile, not just from the castle, from comfort, from ease, from trust. You've been exiled within your own skin for years now, haven't you? Ever since they crowned you and told you who to be. But this time you'll write your own lines. You find your psalter, the one from your exile chamber. Tucked inside are the notes you wrote, scraps of your own voice, small truths scribbled in stolen ink. You unfold one now and smile, because you know something the court doesn't. You came back different. You came back dangerous, and you are not finished yet. They say you have a gift. Not in public, of course. That would be heresy. But whispered behind tapestries and under breath in candlelit corridors. The servants say you can sense illness before it arrives, that your prayers linger in the air longer than other people's, that your touch calms fevers, and your dreams mean something. Some call it blessing, others call it witchcraft. Either way, it's not something you ever asked for. It's just something that clings to you now, like the scent of frankincense after Mass. It starts with a charm, an amulet pressed into your hand by an old midwife during your third pregnancy. Wear this for protection, she says, eyes sharp with something more than kindness. You don't ask what's inside. You don't have to. The herbs sewn into the silk pouch smell like rosemary, yew, and something darker. You hide it under your bodice anyway, because sometimes superstition feels safer than science, and also because you're desperate. After that, more items find their way to you. A ring carved with strange symbols, a bottle of rosewater infused with ash, a length of blue ribbon to ward off the evil eye. You don't seek these things out. They just appear. Gifts from women who've lived longer than they were expected to, or who've lost more than they can count. Women who believe in things the church says aren't real. Women who look at you and see not just a queen, but a survivor. It's not that you believe in magic exactly, but you don't not believe. In a world where childbirth kills more queens than swords ever will, where plague can wipe out half a kingdom before sunset, and where a single rumour can poison a reputation overnight, you take whatever protection you can find. Even if it smells like burnt sage and fear. Of course, you have to be careful. Too many herbs in your bathwater and someone will whisper. Too many sleepless nights pacing the chapel and someone will accuse. A queen is allowed to be pious. A queen is allowed to be wise. But a queen who is too knowing? That's dangerous. There are stories, old ones mostly, about queens who are accused of witchcraft not because they practiced it, but because they survived too much. A stillbirth that didn't kill them, a poisoning that didn't work, a husband who died too suddenly. One queen in Bohemia was blamed for a poor harvest simply because she kept bees and read too many books. They took her to a convent and examined her for signs of possession. She never returned. And it's not just the peasants whispering. Sometimes the nobility are worse. A duchess gifts you a crystal, and then tells the bishop she saw you scrying in a mirror. A baroness jokes, too loudly, that your hairpins are actually blessed thorns from some unholy relic. They're testing you, waiting to see if you'll flinch. You don't. You lean into it. You light candles at odd hours. You carry your psalter everywhere, pages stuffed with pressed herbs. You begin wearing deeper colours, blues and purples associated with wisdom, mourning, mystery. You don't correct them when they call you strange. as you let the image take shape, because a queen who's feared is far harder to remove than one who's merely pitied. You learn to walk the line. You speak often of saints, especially the obscure ones, those who performed miracles that border on the uncanny. You make offerings to the Virgin, always publicly. You fast twice as often. Take communion with lowered eyes, quote scripture with precision. And when someone questions your spiritual devotion, you remind them, softly, politely, that no woman can endure what you've endured without the help of God, and perhaps a few angels, or something else entirely. There's a fringe practice you've adopted, one kept quietly among the women of court. At night, just before sleep, you trace a small mark on your palm with oil and whisper the name of someone you've lost. It's not official doctrine, it's not even in the Book of Hours, but you learned it from a nursemaid, and she swore it kept dreams from turning to nightmares. Whether it works or not, it gives you peace, and these days, peace is a rare thing. Still, the rumours grow, they always do. The bishop glances at you a little longer during sermons. A friar visiting court pauses mid-homily to remind everyone that even queens may be led astray. A noblewoman's child dies in her sleep, and someone mutters that it happened the same week you wore black gloves. You recognise the signs. You know how quickly things can shift from suspicion to accusation. Scholars often debate how seriously the nobility took accusations of witchcraft. Some say it was mostly a tool used to control, to humiliate, to remove inconvenient women. Others argue that belief was genuine, especially among those who saw the church's authority as fragile. You think both are true. Some people believe it because they need to. Others spread it because it works. You're not planning any spells. You don't keep cauldrons bubbling in the cellar. But you do write things down now, phrases you like, things you've overheard, symbols that seem to repeat in your dreams. You've started dreaming in symbols lately. Snakes curled around lilies, doors without hinges, a dove bleeding from its beak. You don't know what it means, but you keep a record anyway. And when you speak, you choose your words carefully. You remind the court of your loyalty, of your faith, of your suffering. You make them feel guilty and grateful and slightly afraid all in the same breath. You host religious scholars, you donate to cathedrals, you commission a chapel window that features St. Margaret, patron of childbirth and difficult women. You're no witch, but you've been treated like one long enough that you've learned how to use the fear. Because if they insist on calling you unnatural, then you'll make sure they never forget how unnatural it would be to cross you. You haven't left the castle walls in weeks, maybe months. Time blurs inside stone and silence, and you lose track of the seasons except for the way the light slants through the chapel windows. So when the proposal arrives, wrapped in gold-threaded parchment and sealed with the Archbishop's seal, you barely breathe before saying yes. A pilgrimage, a journey, not exile, not banishment, but something that sounds holy enough to please your enemies and feels like freedom. At least as close to it as you're allowed. Of course no one thinks you're doing this for God. Not entirely. They say the Queen is going on pilgrimage because she's had too many dreams. Because she mourns too loudly, prays too long, spends too much time in her private garden muttering psalms beneath her breath. They say she's guilty, or cursed, or seeking absolution for sins she's too proud to confess. But they also say it with respect. Because a queen who walks the holy road willingly is both revered and feared. Your destination is a sacred site, some remote abbey halfway across the country, known for its miraculous spring and the bones of a saint who may or may not have existed. The details don't matter. What matters is the path, the movement, the procession, because this isn't a solo journey. Pilgrimages are spectacles. From the moment you leave the castle gates, a trail of attendants, horses, guards, scribes and servants follows in your wake. It's less spiritual journey, more slow-motion parade. The road is mud and ruts and thieving winds. Your carriage jolts over every stone and your back reminds you of every child you've borne. Still you peek out the window, inhale the scent of pine and smoke and living earth. For the first time in what feels like forever, you're outside the performance. You're not sitting under a canopy or a velvet canopy surrounded by backstabbers in velvet cloaks. You're just a woman in motion, trailing prayers and gossip wherever she passes. Villagers gather to watch your caravan pass. Some wave, some kneel, some stare like they expect you to glow. You try to smile, not too warmly, just enough to look divine, not approachable. One little boy throws a flower at your feet. Your horse steps on it. It feels like a metaphor. Along the way, you stop at churches, hostels, abbeys. Each place is a new audience. Each priest wants a blessing, a donation, a glimpse of your piety. You kneel at relics you don't recognise. You kiss bones encaded in gold. You light candles and leave coins. In one chapel, a nun presses a withered hand against your forehead and whispers that you're carrying too many ghosts. You don't argue. Pilgrimage, after all, is as much about repentance as it is about praise. And repentance is a strange thing when you don't know what crime you've committed. You carry guilt like a second shit, but its shape is amorphous. You feel guilty for living when others didn't, for surviving exile, for knowing more than you should, for wanting things you'll never name. There's an old tradition, still followed in certain corners of the kingdom, where pilgrims carry small stones with them, one for each sin. They deposit them at holy sites as if unloading the weight of their failings into the soil. You start collecting stones too. Not sins necessarily, memories. One for each betrayal, one for each child you lost, one for each time you bit your tongue when you wanted to scream. You don't tell anyone what they're for, you just keep them in a pouch around your neck, and when you sleep you feel them press against your chest like truths too heavy to say aloud. A fringe belief among common folk says that if a queen walks the road to a sacred well barefoot, the kingdom's next harvest will be bountiful. You hear it in passing at a market, you cloaked, unrecognised, and you laugh, quietly. And then the next morning you leave your carriage before dawn and walk 3 miles in bare feet. You say it's for penance, but you do it because you can, because it hurts, because for once no one's watching. Pilgrimage also lets you see what the court never will. You see poverty, real poverty. Not the kind they clean up before festivals, but villages starving after late frosts, children with the eyes too big for their faces, mothers with hands like twigs. You give what you can, press coins into calloused palms, but you know it's not enough. It never is. Later, when the court demands why your treasure is lighter, you'll blame alms and prayers, and no one will question it. There's a scholarly debate over whether queens used pilgrimage to escape, to gain power, or to perform virtue. The answer is yes. To all of it. Pilgrimage was protection. It wrapped you in religious immunity. While you walked the holy road, you were untouchable, spiritually, politically, and sometimes even legally. But it was also theatre, and you, ever the performer, knew exactly how to shape the narrative. Your arrival at the final shrine is met with trumpets and chants, a welcome so grand it feels absurd. You're ushered into a chapel glowing with candles and incense. You kneel before the bones of a long-dead saint whose name you've said 100 times but never truly known. You close your eyes, you pray, not for forgiveness, but for strength. You pray for your children, for your memory, for the version of yourself you used to be, before the crown, before the lies, before the endless curtain call that is queenship. You leave your pouch of stones at the foot of the altar, not as repentance, but as proof that you were here, that you carried something, that you chose to carry it. You return to the castle different, not just because your feet are blistered and your back is sore, but because you've remembered something important. You are still moving, still capable of motion. You may be watched, controlled, expected, but you are not finished. And from now on, when they say you're pious, they'll be right. Just not in the way they think. The garden is yours again. Not the royal orchard with its straight rows and noble fruit trees trimmed by servants in liveried coats, but the old walled garden hidden near the back of the Queen's apartments, untouched, unfashionable, slightly overgrown. It's where the lavender runs wild, the rosemary escapes its beds, and the bees forget they're meant to be orderly. It isn't grand, but it's quiet. And in your world, silence is as valuable as gold. It was given to you years ago as a gesture of generosity, or perhaps to keep you occupied. A place to reflect, the steward had said, with a polite bow that suggested your opinions were growing inconvenient. You remember the first time you walked its narrow paths. You were still new, still learning which flowers were considered appropriate for a queen, white lilies for purity, red roses for love, nothing too wild or too foreign. You followed the rules at first. Now, you plant what you like, and you don't ask permission. Every morning you come here alone, or as alone as a queen can ever be. A maid waits just beyond the gate, pretending not to listen. Guards watch from the shadows of the upper walk. But for a few brief minutes you can kneel in the dirt without anyone judging your posture. You can press your fingers into the earth, tug up stubborn weeds, and whisper things into the wind that no one else will ever hear. You begin keeping certain plants no one else understands. Feverfew for headaches, rue for protection, mugwort for dreams, a sprig of vervain tucked behind a sun-warmed stone. The court thinks it's quaint. They call it the Queen's little hobby, with the kind of tone they'd use for embroidery or harmless madness. Let them think it. They don't understand that in this garden, you speak a language older than the court, older than kings, one of seeds and scent, of slow-growing truths. Your ladies-in-waiting know better. Some of them, at least. The wiser ones bring you cuttings from their family lands, seeds smuggled in from distant abbeys. A certain countess sends you saffron bulbs every spring, and though you've never exchanged more than pleasantries in public, you suspect she knows exactly what you're doing. Women have always shared secrets through plants, through the tinctures they brew and the petals they press between pages. A fringed tale reaches your ears. A merchant's daughter once saw you walking through the garden in the rain. Arms raised, hair loose, lips moving. She swears you were chanting. Her mother swears you made the storm stop. By the time the tale makes it to court, you're half sorceress, half saint. You smile when you hear it, because it isn't true, but it could have been. The garden becomes more than refuge, it becomes strategy. You start inviting women to meet you there. Not nobles, not loud power players, quiet ones, widows, sisters of fallen knights, daughters with sharp minds and no marriage prospects. They sit with you among the herbs and speak freely in the shade of fig trees no one bothers to prune. You listen, you offer small favours, an intercession here, a letter there. Nothing loud, nothing traceable, but over time, the Queen's garden begins to bloom with something other than flowers. You keep a notebook now, hidden inside a weathered gardening manual. Each entry is marked not with names, but with plants. Thistle for the woman who warned you about the ambassador's betrayal. Marigold for the maid who smuggled your message out of the convent. Bay leaf for the girl who told you where the steward keeps his second set of keys. It's not blackmail, it's gratitude. Roots of a different kind. There's a scholarly debate about how queens use domestic spaces to wield influence. Some claim that the Queen's chambers and gardens were merely symbolic, places of retreat, not power. Others argue these feminine spaces became hidden networks of soft diplomacy and quiet resistance. You know where you stand on the matter. Power doesn't always come with a seal or a sword. Sometimes it smells like time and grows in silence. And then there's the part of the garden no one else enters. Behind a crumbling wall, half concealed by vines, there's a corner you've claimed for yourself. A bench carved with symbols too worn to read. A ring of stones placed just so. Here, you speak to the dead. Not with ceremony, not with incense, just softly. Your lips moving without sudden sound. You tell them what's happened, what you've done, what you still fear. You don't expect answers, but the act of speaking is enough. Sometimes the wind stirs the lavender just as you finish, and you take it as an answer anyway. This space becomes a mirror. You see yourself more clearly here than you ever did in the royal apartments. You are no longer just a crown balanced on exhaustion. You're a woman who has survived war, exile, grief, betrayal, childbirth, and silence. You have been sainted, slandered, and scrubbed down to your barest bones, and yet you are still here. One morning, you find a gift placed on the garden bench. A tiny bouquet of chamomile, bound in golden thread. No note, no explanation, but you understand, someone knows, someone is grateful, or maybe someone is simply reminding you you're not the only one who watches. You press the flowers between the pages of your psalter. You return to the dirt, the pruning, the planting, and you continue to grow. Your daughter stands before you in a gown too heavy for her age, spine straight, eyes wide, mouth drawn in the same line you've seen in the mirror 1,000 times. She's only 12, maybe 13, but already she's being fitted for a life that's not her own. The court calls it a betrothal, but you know exactly what it is. Another transaction. Another girl handed over to seal a deal. This time the deal is your daughter, and the hand signing it is your own. You didn't want this. Of course you didn't. But wanting has nothing to do with it. The match was negotiated months ago, while you were tending roses and pretending not to overhear your son arguing with the Chancellor. It's a strong alliance, they said, politically unassailable. His lands are fertile, his coffers full, and his last wife only died of natural causes. You asked what kind of natural causes at 31, and no one answered. So here she is, your daughter, your joy, your shadow, standing in the throne room as nobles smile too tightly and scribes dip their quills to record the moment. She's being promised to a man twice her age in a country where she doesn't speak the language, and you're expected to smile, you're expected to look proud, and you do, because this is the game. And now she's a piece on the board. She doesn't cry, not once. That breaks your heart more than tears would have. She listens to the terms, dowry, titles, land transfers, with the same glazed-over eyes you wore at her age. She asks the right questions. When will she leave? Will you visit? Does she have to wear his family's colours? You answer carefully, softly, all while trying not to scream. You remember your own mother explaining marriage to you with the same resigned kindness. "It will be your duty," she said, brushing your hair back like it was something to be proud of. You wonder now if she was proud, or if she sat up the night before your wedding and wept behind the tapestry just as you do now, hidden from view while your daughter tries on her new title in the mirror. Later, in your private chambers, she asks you the question you've been dreading. Did you love father? Not do you. Did. Past tense. You think about how to answer, about how long it took you to find something like love in the man who treated affection like a privilege to be rationed, about the years of quiet evenings, of polite dinners, of shared silences that eventually became something soft. Not love, perhaps, but something close enough to pretend. You tell her yes, and for once, it's not entirely a lie. There's a quiet scholarly war about whether royal mothers had any real influence over their daughters' marriages. Some claim queens were nothing more than messengers, forced to smile through negotiations made without them. Others point to records, letters, diary fragments, court testimonies that suggest queens lobbied fiercely behind the scenes for better matches, more lenient terms, softer landings. You've done both. You've been silenced and you've schemed. You've lost battles and won little wars with dowry clauses slipped between the lines. Your daughter's betrothal is, by all courtly standards, a triumph. It secures trade routes, avoids conflict, and elevates your family's influence. But to you, it's a grief dressed in silk. The court begins preparations. The betrothal feast is planned down to the final candied rose petal. Musicians rehearse, tapestries are commissioned. A poet writes a flattering ballad that describes your daughter's eyes as starlight captured in ocean glass, which sounds romantic until you remember you also used that line for a duchess's hound last winter. You oversee it all with practised grace. You choose the gown, you approve the jewellery, you instruct your daughter on how to curtsy without trembling, you teach her how to breathe during the ceremonial blessing so her knees don't buckle. You train her like a soldier, because that's what she is now. A noble woman on the front lines of political diplomacy. Her battleground is the bridal chamber. Her armour is etiquette. Her sword is silence. The day of the feast arrives and everything is perfect, because perfection is the only thing left you can control. She looks older in the torchlight, radiant, untouchable. You sit beside her and pretend not to hear the whispers about her hips, her womb, her future sons. You nod at the ambassador who will escort her to her new life. You sip wine that tastes like resignation. There's a fringe story from a lesser-known kingdom where queens would secretly mark their daughters' parting dresses with stitched prayers, hidden under the hem, sewn in thread soaked in myrrh. You do the same, late at night, alone in the sewing chamber. A single line in your native tongue. Come home safe, come home strong. She'll never see it, but that's not the point. The day after the feast she departs. The courtyard is filled with horses, trunks, guards, and onlookers pretending this is all perfectly normal. You stand at the top of the stone steps and watch her climb into the carriage, face calm, lips set. She looks up at you once, and it's not a goodbye. It's a promise. You feel your throat close and your hands tremble beneath your sleeves. She is gone by mid-morning. The palace is quieter now. Her chamber still smells like lavender and parchment. You sit there sometimes just to remember how her laughter sounded. The court has already moved on to new entertainments, new intrigues, but you sit at your writing desk and begin a letter. You'll write to her every week, even if the letters are intercepted, delayed, ignored. You'll send little comforts, bits of poetry, pressed flowers, stories from her childhood she doesn't remember. You'll remind her who she is, who you are, what you survived, because she will need it, and because the queen who raised her never stopped being her mother. They call it widowhood, but it doesn't feel like release. It feels like a rearrangement, a quiet shuffling of rooms and power and titles. The king is dead. Your husband, ruler, betrayer, occasional companion, father of your children, is gone, The court wears black, the priests drone solemn chants, and a nation performs grief with perfect discipline. But for you, it's not just a crown that's shifted, it's the air. Your first thought, when the news came, wasn't sorrow, it was stillness. As if something inside you, something long wound tight, had finally exhaled. Not relief, not joy, certainly not despair, just space. The kind you haven't felt since you were a girl walking into the court for the first time with your dowry pinned to your chest and no idea what you were giving up. Now they call you the Queen Dowager, which is a polite way of saying you've been retired. You're not Queen Regnant. You're not a ruling widow like Catherine de' Medici or Eleanor of Aquitaine, though you still might be dangerous enough to earn the same suspicion. You're a figure of the past, an honoured relic, draped in black velvet and expected to fade tastefully into history. But you are not history. You're still here. And that makes people nervous. The first thing they do is move you, again, not out of the palace entirely, but into a smaller set of rooms at the edge of the Queen's wing. They're beautiful, of course, embroidered tapestries, warm hearths, glass-paned windows, but they're not yours. Your seal is revoked. Your household is reassigned. You're given new ladies, new chambermaids, new boundaries. It's like being uncrowned, gracefully, politely, with just enough ceremony to make it sting. They also give you a stipend, a generous one so long as you don't cause problems. You can remain at court, they say, attend feast days, sponsor a nunnery or two, take up embroidery, pray, remain visible but not too visible, gracious but not influential. The message is clear, you've had your turn, and yet people still come to you. Noble women with quiet problems, young men with dead mothers, daughters with broken engagements. They knock softly, slip into your chamber under the guise of paying respects, and whisper questions into your firelit rooms. Because while you may be retired, your wisdom is not, your memory is not. You have watched this court through 20 winters, and that kind of knowledge doesn't just disappear. You receive letters now with subtle requests, from widowed queens in other countries, from abbesses, from merchants' wives, even from ambassadors' secretaries who still believe in your counsel. It's a strange kind of power, this posthumous influence. Quiet, informal, but persistent. The younger queen, your daughter-in-law now, nods to you at banquets, respects you, fears you perhaps a little. You made sure of that. There's a historical debate about what power dowager queens actually held. Some claim they were little more than decorative ghosts, elegant symbols of the past with no real authority. Others point to letters, charters, and court decisions that show how widowed queens continued to advise, manipulate, and even rule behind the veil. You're not writing charters anymore, but you're certainly not a ghost. Your wardrobe changes. No more golden embroidery, no more sapphires or peacock blue silks. You wear black, of course, sometimes grey. You veil yourself in mourning lace, and people assume that what they see is grief. In truth, it's armour, because mourning in your position is as political as any council vote. If you grieve too little, you're heartless. Too long, and you're using his death for sympathy. So you craft your sorrow the way you once crafted your smile, deliberate so. You write letters to your children with renewed frequency. Your daughter writes back with questions about motherhood and court dynamics in her new home. Your son, now king, sends shorter replies, often dictated, sometimes clipped, always respectful. He trusts you for now. You know that could change. You keep your advice mild, your warnings gentle, but you watch closely. The moment he begins to listen more to his advisors than to his own instincts, you'll be ready. Because widowhood isn't freedom, but it can be opportunity. You begin to fund small projects, quietly of course. A chapel restored in the name of a forgotten saint. A small school for noble girls who have no dowry but good minds. A convent for women who refuse marriage, who want to serve but not to breed. You don't boast about these things. You let word spread slowly. Let others take credit if it keeps the work safe. But piece by piece you start building something of your own. Not a kingdom, not a legacy, a sanctuary. There's a fringe rumour about a queen who after the king's death gathered a secret circle of women who governed quietly from within a convent library. They wore habits by day, held councils by candlelight, and ensured that every noble house that wronged them lost favour within a generation. You don't believe every part of that story, but you believe enough of it to make it useful. When the court looks at you now, it sees the Queen Mother. The final title, the end of the arc, but you know better. You know that the game never ends, only the pieces change. You've played pawn, consort, exile, and queen. Now you become something else. The one who watches, the one who remembers, the one who plants things knowing she may not live to see them bloom. And when the court whispers that you've grown quiet in your grief, you smile, because they've mistaken silence for surrender again. They sing about you now, not every day, not everywhere, but enough that your name has left the parchment and entered the firelight. Minstrels pluck their lutes in smoky taverns, and your life becomes rhyme. Sometimes you're a tragic heroine, eyes wet with holy tears. Sometimes you're the scheming widow who whispered kings into war. On good nights, you're a saint wrapped in velvet. On bad nights, you're the witch in the tower, the serpent behind the throne. Either way, you're never just you. The truth has slipped through the cracks, as it always does. It doesn't matter how carefully you kept your journals, how many prayers you whispered, how tightly you held your secrets. History isn't shaped by facts, it's shaped by storytellers. And right now, the storytellers have turned their gaze toward your legacy. One bard sings a ballad where you poison your rival with a candied fig. Another tells of a lover you hid in the wine cellar for a decade, his beard growing down to his knees before the king found out. None of it is true. But then again, some of it could have been. You've done enough in your life to blur the line between rumour and possibility, and once that line disappears, people will believe whatever version of you makes the best story. You listen sometimes, not because you enjoy the fictions, but because you're trying to understand what the world wants from you now. If they sing you as a villain, is it because they fear you, or because they miss you? If they cast you as a tragic queen, does it soften their guilt for how they watched you suffer and said nothing? There's a comfort in becoming myth. Myths don't have to bleed. They don't age, they don't limp, they don't lie awake at night wondering if they made the right choices. Myths live forever in songs and tapestries, sanitized or scandalized, but always remembered. And that, more than anything, is the one currency left to you now: memory. History likes its women simple: virgin, mother, temptress, witch. You are never simple, and that makes them nervous. So they try to collapse you into one of those tidy roles. They argue about it. Scholars, priests, gossip mongers. They can't decide if you were a force of goodness or a symptom of rot. You walked with saints, yes, but also spoke to midwives who murmured old pagan things. You wore black longer than custom dictated. You received books you weren't supposed to. You kissed your children like they might vanish and ordered noblemen from your chambers like they were footmen. So now, centuries later, they're still trying to pin you down. Did she love her husband? Did she commit treason? Did she practice witchcraft? Or was she just clever? Did she mourn or did she manipulate? You read a letter once, a scholar debating your faith. He said, "We cannot be certain of her piety, as her attendance at Mass was frequent but politically convenient." As if the two can't live together. As if you couldn't love God and still use the altar to send messages. As if women aren't constantly forced to thread their truth through needle holes just to survive. There's a fringe theory that you wrote your own eulogy, that somewhere in the archives is a letter signed only with your initials, describing your life in sharp, unforgiving detail. The names you couldn't speak, the betrayals you never voiced, the dreams you buried under ritual and duty. You wish that were true. You wish you'd had the time, or the nerve. But what you did leave behind is subtler. Scraps of yourself in prayer books and council notes, in the margins of diplomatic letters and the spines of herbals passed hand to hand among court women. You know how legacies are built. You helped construct a few yourself. You once arranged a grand funeral for a duchess who died of scandal, hired poets to recast her as a noble matron, and made sure her children inherited clean titles. You know how to scrub a name until it gleams, and now they're doing it to you, scrubbing, repainting, reframing, smoothing over your thorns and polishing your silence until it shines like gold. But here's the strange thing. You're still here to see it. You walk through the halls where they now hang your portrait. The one painted years ago when you were at your most decorative. Your expression is serene, your hair arranged just so. You look like someone else. But then you notice the small detail the painter included. A violet ribbon at your wrist. Your signal to your daughter on her wedding day. A secret embedded in the brushstroke. You smile. Someone remembered. A few younger women curtsy as you pass. Not deeply, but with a kind of respect that goes beyond formality. They've heard the songs, they've read the stories, they know you are not simple and they admire you for it. One even dares to ask your opinion on a marriage negotiation, and you see in her face that same fear you wore once. The knowledge that she is about to be written into someone else's story. You tell her the truth, carefully, quietly, and she listens like it might save her life. So maybe this is what your legacy will be. Not the songs or the painted lies, but the soft thread of truth passed from queen to queen, from woman to woman. Not a monument, but a murmured name, not a crown, but a caution, and maybe, eventually, a kind of reverence not built on perfection, but on endurance. They will get you wrong, that is certain, they already have, but if enough women remember even a fraction of who you really were, the girl in the too-heavy gown, the queen in the garden, the mother in mourning, the widow who still watched everything, then maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything. You're old now, though no one says it to your face, and they speak in euphemisms. The Queen Mother is resting. Her Grace no longer attends long council sessions. She prefers quiet these days. But you know what they mean. The court sees you as twilight, a once bright flame now flickering gently in its final hours. They're not entirely wrong. Your joints ache. Your sleep is light. You lose names more often than you used to, though never the ones that matter. You spend most of your days in the West Wing, where the sunlight falls just right through the windows and warms the stone like a long-forgotten blessing. The garden is still yours. Your ladies have changed, aged, left or died, but one or two remain, loyal, familiar. You no longer pretend to oversee anything. There's nothing left to oversee. The new queen has her own court, her own crises, her own favourites. Your son rules with competence, if not brilliance. He visits when he can, and when he does, he speaks gently, as though you might crumble if asked a real question. You don't blame him. You've taught him well enough to recognise a woman who's carrying too many ghosts. You've become something of an artefact. When foreign emissaries arrive, they ask to see you out of courtesy. Their scribes record your appearance, elegant despite her years. The dowager retains her famed composure, as if you were a painting come to life. Sometimes they ask for your blessing. Sometimes they ask if you remember their grandfather. You usually do. You remember more than they expect, and more than they'll ever know. Sometimes you reread the letters you never sent, the ones to your daughter, sealed and hidden in the lining of your travelling chest. You never knew if they'd reach her. You don't know now, but you wrote less and less over the years. Not out of indifference, but because life overtook her. Marriage, children, survival. You've heard she's strong. You've heard she rules her husband's court with quiet steel. You hope the stitched prayer in her wedding gown still whispers to her in dreams. Your notebooks are tucked into the corner of a shelf behind your psalter, aged and curled with time. Inside them are names, phrases, flowers, warnings. You read them sometimes, half to remember, half to see if they still feel true. One entry, dated 2 decades ago, simply reads, "Nothing in a queen's life belongs to her except what she hides." You don't remember writing it, but you know it was you. And still, despite your retreat from the stage, the court can't fully let you go. Your name is invoked in council debates. Her Grace would not have allowed this, or the Queen Mother once advised. They argue using your memory, your imagined judgment. You've become a kind of political ghost, still haunting decisions you'll never hear about. Part of you resents it. The rest of you's impressed. Even now they can't agree on what you meant, what you wanted, who you really were. That's power. There's a scholarly argument unfolding in a city you've never seen, in a time you'll never live to witness. Young men in robes debate your life in sunlit halls, turning you into a case study. They write papers on your marriages, your influence, your exile. They question your faith, your foreign customs, your reputation. Some believe you are devout, others think you are a manipulator and a wimple. A few call you proto-feminist, though they don't know your name. You've become history now. The part they'll never get right is this. You didn't survive to become a legend. You became a legend because you survived. In your final days, the air grows softer, the light thicker. The physician visits daily now, though you ask him not to fuss. Your chamber smells of lavender, beeswax and rosemary, your signature, your comfort, your protection. The maids whisper when you cough. You pretend not to notice. You don't fear death. Not anymore. You've seen it too often, walked beside it too long. It's not an enemy. It's a hand you've known was waiting. What you fear is forgetting, that your truths will vanish beneath someone else's version of your story. But even that fear fades in time. On your last morning you wake early. The garden is still blooming. The sky is pale pink as if the heavens are stretching. You walk one final circuit, trailing your fingers over familiar leaves. Your oldest maid follows, gently, eyes wet. You smile at her, not because you feel strong, but because that's what queens do. When you return to your chamber, you sit at your desk and open your psalter. Inside it, tucked between the pages of the Book of Judith, is a small folded scrap of parchment. You've written just 6 words in your native tongue, in the handwriting of a woman who once wore a crown and walked through fire. Let them wonder who I was. That night, you slip into sleep without ceremony, without fear, surrounded by silence, herbs, and history. You go not as a queen, not as a villain, not as a martyr, but as yourself. Now the candles have burned low and the castle lies quiet. The halls echo with fewer footsteps these days, and your name, once spoken daily, sharply, reverently, even fearfully, has become something softer, like a thread woven through other people's stories. They don't speak it aloud at council anymore, but it lingers in the spaces between decisions. It flickers in the firelight when someone mentions wisdom or caution, or the quiet strength of women who've known what it is to bleed without witnesses. They've buried you with ceremony, draped in the black and violet robes of mourning, laced with gold to remind everyone what you once were. The funeral was as grand as expected. The bells rang. The court wore veils. The archbishop spoke about dignity and devotion, about duty and quiet strength. But what they didn't say, what they'll never say in the open, is how much they still fear you. Not your ghost, but your story, because they can't agree on what it was. There's a statue now, somewhere near the chapel garden you once restored. It doesn't look like you, not really. The nose is wrong, the mouth is too gentle, but the posture is close, straight-backed, watchful, hands folded just so. Below it, a line carved into stone, Queen Mother Exile Flame. You didn't choose those words, but they're not wrong. Over time you fade, like all queens do, but bits of you remain. A certain herb kept in kitchens long after anyone remembers who first grew it. A story passed from the nursemaid to daughter about a queen who walked barefoot for luck. A rule in the palace gardens that lavender must never be trimmed too short. No one remembers why, but they obey it anyway. And the songs, they're still sung. Changed now, of course. Romanticised, softened. You are the queen of sorrow, of strength, of strange wisdom. Some versions of the tale give you wings. One calls you a star, but you know better. You were a woman, you were a queen, you were never simple, and you endured.